The human screams of shock made the hibernation chamber walls shudder as the cryopods hissed open, spilling out 1,000 bewildered humans onto the decks of the colony ship Odyssey. Lungs gasped, eyes blinked, muscles trembled, brains throbbed, adjusting to an impossible reality. It was now the year 870,000 AD. Commander Walter Green stumbled out, heart pounding. The ship AI's voice crackled over the intercom. "We've arrived at Elysium, but the planet is already inhabited by an advanced alien race called the Mizarians. They are part of a galactic federation, and they thought humans were extinct, our Earth destroyed long ago." Walter's blood ran cold. He clenched his fists. Extinct? Earth destroyed? Elysium already settled by aliens. This was all wrong. The plan had been for the Odyssey to carry the last of humanity to an unclaimed world, to rebuild their civilization after Earth became uninhabitable, not to awaken 800,000 years later to find their destination stolen and their species a faded memory. Venturing down to Elysium's surface with his second-in-command Jake Stevens, Walter made first contact with the Mizarians, humanoid beings with elongated blue bodies. Their leader, Counselor Indus, seemed shocked by the humans' sudden reappearance, but welcomed them graciously, inviting them to the Grand Capital to meet the Galactic Federation Council. However, something felt off to Walter, a subtle tension behind the polite alien smiles and words. The council leader, Zardoc in particular, seemed to be hiding something, an uneasiness in his demeanor as he greeted the humans. Walter's instincts screamed that a darker truth lurked beneath the surface, like a ticking bomb. He was right. Behind closed doors, Zardoc revealed to Indus the real reason for the humans' mysterious disappearance and their fragmentary records. 800,000 years ago, there had been a devastating war between the Mizarians and humans. In the aftermath, the victorious Mizarians had forcibly removed the human survivors from Earth, dismantled their civilization, erased their history, and exiled them as frozen cargo on the Odyssey. Also, the Mizarians could claim Earth and its resources for themselves. And now the humans were back, a ghost from the past that could expose the Mizarians' buried crimes and lies to the whole Galactic Federation. If the truth got out, it could reignite the ancient human-Mizarian war and rip the Federation apart. The clock was ticking. The future of humankind, the Mizarians, and the whole Galactic Federation hung in the balance as Walter Green and his band of 1,000 cryo-preserved humans stood on the precipice of a history-defining moment 800,000 years in the making. In a game of galactic powers, the stakes were no less than survival or extinction. Who would uncover the truth first, and who would bury it forever? Walter wasted no time getting the human survivors organized and working. They had a settlement to establish, and a whole lot of catching up to do. "Jake, I need you to take a team and scout out the area around the landing site," Walter said. "Look for resources we can use, good spots to start building. We need to get this settlement up and running as fast as possible." "On it, boss," Jake said. He started rounding up some of the more able-bodied men and women. While they headed out, Walter ducked into the Odyssey's computer core with Max Ryder, the ship's chief engineer. The core hummed with alien energy. They were tied into the Mizarian networks now. "Max, I need you to start analyzing their technology, looking for any weaknesses or vulnerabilities we can exploit," Walter told him. "And see if you can dig into their databases. I want to know the truth about what happened to our species." Max cracked his knuckles. "I'll peel back the layers on these blue bastards. We'll find out what they're hiding." In the Mizarian capital, Counselor Indus marched into Zardoc's chambers. "The humans have begun establishing a settlement," he reported. "They're organizing quickly." Zardoc stroked his elongated chin, his eyes narrowing. Paranoia ate at him. "We can't let them get too independent. Assign some of our agents to infiltrate their settlement. Sabotage their efforts, but subtly. Make them reliant on our aid." "Do not question me," Zardoc snapped. "I will not let the humans become a threat to us again, not after what it took to defeat them last time." Walter, meanwhile, slipped away from the settlement to a secluded ravine. A cloaked figure was waiting there, Zorin, the Kintarian ambassador. "Thank you for meeting me," Walter said. "I take a great risk in doing so," Zorin said. "But there are rumors, whispers of a war long ago between your kind and the Mizarians. A war that was covered up." Walter leaned in. "Tell me everything you know." Zorin's face was grim. "I know little for certain. The Mizarians keep a tight lid on the past, but there are stories of a great conflict, of worlds burning, and of the Mizarians going to extreme lengths to erase all traces of it afterwards, to make the galaxy forget humanity ever existed." A chill ran through Walter. Why would they do that? "I do not know, but I advise caution in dealing with them. Do not trust their friendly facade." Zorin placed a data chip in Walter's hand. "I will share any intelligence I uncover. You are not alone in this." Back at the settlement, Jake oversaw the construction of prefab shelters, his scout team having found a good water source and quarry site. The work was back-breaking but satisfying. Suddenly, a thunderclap rocked the valley. Orange flames belched from the half-completed power station. Screams rang out. Jake sprinted toward the blast, shoving through the fleeing crowds. The generator building was engulfed in fire and shrapnel. Jake plunged in, ignoring the searing heat. He found 2 workers trapped under a collapsed beam, flames licking at them. Gritting his teeth, Jake heaved the girder off them and dragged them out. A second explosion ripped through the structure, just as they cleared it. The blast wave slammed into Jake, peppering him with white-hot metal shards. He fell, his back seared with pain, the edges of his vision darkening. Gasping, he crawled over to the injured men. "You're gonna be okay," he rasped, ripping strips of his shirt to staunch their bleeding. Even as his own blood ran into his eyes, he worked to save them. In the Mizarian council chamber, a heated debate was raging. "The humans cannot be trusted," Zardoc insisted. "They are a danger to the stability of our Federation. We must relocate them to a remote planet where they can be contained." "Preposterous," another councillor said. "We cannot simply uproot them. They have rights." "They are a traumatized people," Zardoc countered. "They need our guidance and protection for their own good." The council argued back and forth, their views divided. Some wanted to help the humans heal and integrate into the galactic community. Others feared their potential and wanted them marginalized. While the debate continued, Max pored over the Mizarian files he had cracked, his eyes widening. "Walter, you need to see this." Walter rushed over, still shaken by Zorin's revelations. "What is it?" "Records on Indus, heavily encrypted, but I broke through." Max brought the files up on the screen. He was a leader in the war against Earth, pushed for the harshest sanctions, the exile of humanity. "My God," Walter breathed, rage swelling in him as he read the records. He was behind it all, and look at his bio, he's centuries old. The Mizarians have kept him alive all this time with their advanced medicine. He smacked his palm on the console. "He's our real enemy. He's always been our enemy." Walter keyed in a call to the Mizarian capital. "I need to meet with Councillor Indus. Immediately. I have to confront him, to get the truth." Walter's eyes were hard as steel. "One way or another, we end this now. No more lies, no more running." He grabbed his sidearm and a data pad loaded with the incriminating files, then headed for the shuttle bay. The final reckoning awaited. Walter's shuttle touched down at the Mizarian capital, his eyebrows furrowed as he strode towards the gleaming council chambers. The data pad felt heavy in his hand, loaded with the damning evidence Max had uncovered. He pushed past the blue-skinned guards, barging into Indus's private office. "We need to talk," Walter growled, slamming the datapad on Indus's desk. Indus's eyes widened, then narrowed. "These are classified documents. How did you—" "Doesn't matter. What matters is what they say about you, about what your people did to mine." For a long moment, Indus said nothing. Then he sighed, shoulders sagging. "It's true, all of it." "Why?" Walter demanded, voice raw. "Why did you destroy our world, erase us from history?" "You were advancing too quickly," Indus said. Your technology, your aggression, we saw the writing on the wall. It was only a matter of time before humanity became a galactic threat. Indus nodded. A precision strike. Our particle beam induced a gamma-ray burst that wiped out most of your civilization. The survivors. We couldn't risk leaving any loose ends. Walter's fists clenched. And now will you come clean, let us rebuild? I can't, Indus said. The peace we've built, the order, I won't jeopardize that. You mean your lies, Walter spat. Rough hands grabbed Walter. He struggled, but a stun baton to his ribs dropped him to his knees. Zadok loomed over him, eyes blazing. You've overplayed your hand, human. Your kind are too dangerous to be left unchecked. Take him away, and prepare to neutralize the human settlement. As Walter was dragged off, Indus watched with a troubled expression. For the first time in millennia, doubt gnawed at him. In the detention center, Walter hung limply in his restraints. His body ached from Zadok's enhanced interrogation sessions. Where are the Odyssey's weapon caches? Zadok demanded again. Walter spat blood. Go to hell. Zadok backhanded him. You will break, human. They always do. Meanwhile, on Elysium, Jake limped through the hastily built fortifications. His burns still pained him, but he pushed through it. Status report, he barked at Max, who was hunched over a jury-rigged computer terminal. I've managed to hack into their comms, Max said, but it's not good. They're mobilizing for a full assault. Jake nodded grimly. Then we fight for Walter, for Earth, for our future. As the humans dug in for battle, light years away on the Federation capital, Ambassador Zorin addressed the council. Esteemed colleagues, the Kintarian's voice rang out, I present evidence of a great deception. Gasps and shouts of outrage filled the chamber as Zorin laid bare the Mizarians' crimes. The council fractured, some calling for sanctions against Mizarians, others defending their actions. Back on Elysium, alarms blared. Jake sprinted to the perimeter. Mizarian ships darkened the sky. Jake raised his makeshift particle rifle. Stand your ground, he roared. Today we take back our destiny. The first shots flashed across the battlefield. The fight for humanity's future had begun. Begun. Jake's finger tightened on the trigger as the first Mizarian troops touched down. Plasma bolts sizzled through the air, scorching the earth around the human defenders. Hold the line, Jake shouted over the din of battle. Beside him, a young woman named Sarah returned fire, her face set with grim focus. The humans fought with desperate courage, but they were badly outgunned. Jake watched in horror as Mizarian energy weapons cut down several of his comrades. Just as it seemed the perimeter would collapse, a barrage of unfamiliar weapons fire rained down on the Mizarian forces. Kintarian ships swooped in, their superior technology hammering the invaders. Jake glimpsed the distinctive profile of Zorin's personal craft, leading the charge. Cavalry's here, Jake yelled. A ragged cheer went up from the human lines. With the Kintarians evening the odds, the humans rallied. Jake led a counterattack that drove the Mizarians back to their landing craft. As the last enemies retreated, Zorin's ship touched down. The lanky Kintarian strode out, flanked by his officers bearing crates of equipment. My friend, Zorin said, clasping Jake's arm, we bring weapons, supplies, and intelligence. The Federation Council grows divided over this conflict. You are not alone in this fight. Meanwhile, in the command bunker, Walter pored over the Mizarian technology they'd captured. He turned to Max Ryder, who was elbow-deep in alien circuitry. What have you got for me, Max? The engineer's eyes gleamed. I've cracked their energy shielding, boss. Give me a week and I can have a prototype up and running. It'll protect us from orbital bombardment. Walter clapped him on the shoulder. Outstanding work, get it done. Just then, an alert flashed on the main display. Walter's eyes widened as he read the incoming transmission. My God, he breathed, it's Indus. He wants to defect. Hours later, the renegade Mizarian counselor stood before Walter, flanked by armed guards. Indus's elongated face was haggard, his eyes haunted. "I can no longer stand by while Zardoc perpetrates this evil," Indus said. "I have brought you critical intelligence on Mizarian defenses, and—" He hesitated. "Information on a weapon of unimaginable power, one that was used against Earth long ago." Walter leaned forward, his heart pounding. "Tell me everything." As Indus spoke, laying bare the horrifying truth of humanity's near extinction, Walter's fists clenched. When the Mizarian finished, Walter stood, his face like stone. "Max," he said, "prep a strike team. We're taking the fight to Zardoc." Across the stars, in his fortress on the Mizarian homeworld, Zardoc raged at his subordinates. "Indus has betrayed us," he snarled. "Accelerate the final solution. We end this now." His top general paled. "But sir, the weapon isn't fully tested." Zardoc seized him by the throat. "I don't care. Fire when ready. Burn Elysium to ash just as we did Earth. Let the humans be erased from history once and for all." As klaxons blared and Mizarian crews scrambled to their stations, a single human frigate dropped out of hyperspace on the edge of the system. Walter stood on the bridge, surveying the titanic Mizarian fleet arrayed against them. "This is it," he said quietly. "The moment that decides the fate of our species." He keyed the ship-wide comm. "All hands prepare for battle." The human vessels surged forward, guns blazing, as they began their desperate assault on Zardoc's doomsday weapon. The years passed, and Elysium flourished under Walter Green's leadership. Gleaming spires of glass and steel rose from the once barren landscape, a testament to human ingenuity and alien cooperation. Walter stood on the balcony of the Central Administration Building, surveying the bustling city below. Kintarian hover transports zipped between buildings, their sleek designs a far cry from the ramshackle vehicles of the early settlement days. In the distance, a massive fusion reactor, built with shared technology, hummed with power, providing clean energy to the entire colony. Walter's communications officer, a young woman named Aria, approached him with a datapad. "Sir, we've received new intelligence reports." Walter took the pad, his face hardening as he read. "Zardoc," he muttered. "I should have known he'd resurface." The reports detailed Zardoc's activities, weapons deals with fringe groups, recruitment from extremist factions, ship movements in restricted sectors. It all pointed to one thing, a looming assault on everything they'd built. Walter called an emergency meeting of the Federation Council. Representatives from a dozen species gathered in the holographic chamber, their avatars flickering to life around the circular table. "We face a grave threat," Walter began, laying out the evidence. "Zardoc is amassing forces for a final push against us. We must act now." "We will mobilize the Alliance Guard," he declared. "A joint task force drawing from all our peoples. We'll hunt Zardoc down before he can strike." As the meeting adjourned, Walter received a priority communication. Jake Stevens's face appeared on the screen, older now but still bearing the same determined expression. "I heard about the Zardoc situation," Jake said. "I'm volunteering to lead a strike team. We'll take that bastard down once and for all." Walter nodded, a mix of pride and concern on his face. "Approved. But Jake, be careful out there. We've lost too many already." Days later, Walter stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Terran Hope, as it led the Alliance Armada through hyperspace. Tactical displays showed hundreds of ships, human, Kintarian, and others, all united against the Purifier threat. A sensor officer called out, "Contact! Multiple hostile signatures detected in the Omega Centauri cluster." Walter's eyes narrowed. "So that's where you've been hiding, Zardoc. All ships, battle stations, prepare to engage." The fleet dropped out of hyperspace into chaos. A massive Purifier dreadnought loomed before them, surrounded by swarms of fighter craft. Energy weapons flashed across the void, striking Alliance shields. Walter barked orders, coordinating the attack. Fighters screamed past the viewports, locked in deadly dogfights with Purifier craft. Suddenly, a familiar voice crackled over the comms. "This is Indus. I have critical information on the dreadnought's defenses. Walter hesitated for a moment, memories of past betrayals flashing through his mind, but he pushed them aside. Patch him through. We need every advantage we can get. As Indus relayed the intel, the dreadnought's main cannon fired. The blast tore through the Terran Hope's shields, rocking the ship violently. Sparks flew from consoles as systems failed. Walter grabbed the command rail to steady himself. "Status report!" Walter's mind raced. With the flagship crippled, the entire attack was in jeopardy. He opened a channel to Jake's strike team. "Jake, we're sitting ducks up here. It's up to you now. Take that thing down from the inside." "Copy that," Jake's voice crackled back. "We're going in hot." Walter watched helplessly as Jake's assault shuttle weaved through the battlefield, drawing ever closer to the massive dreadnought. The fate of humanity, of the entire Federation, now rested in his old friend's hands. Years passed after the defeat of Zardok's forces. Walter Green stood at the helm of the Alliance Guard, his eyes fixed on the holographic display before him. The room buzzed with activity as officers scurried about, relaying information and coordinating fleet movements. "Supreme Commander, we've got incoming reports from the Outer Rim," a young lieutenant said, handing Walter a datapad. Walter's brow furrowed as he read the intel. "Vortak," he muttered. The name sent a chill through the command center. Within hours, Walter had assembled his top advisors. "We've confirmed that Vortak, Zardok's former general, has established a base on Krios," he said, pulling up a holomap of the remote moon. "He's amassing weapons and recruiting radicals. Our worst fears are coming true. The Purifiers are regrouping." Admiral Chen, a grizzled veteran of countless battles, leaned forward. "What's our play, sir?" Walter's eyes narrowed. "We need eyes on the ground. I'm dispatching Logan Reeves and his team to infiltrate Krios." Days later, Logan Reeves crouched behind a rocky outcropping on Krios's barren surface. His team spread out around him, each member a seasoned operative handpicked for this mission. Through his scope, Logan observed a steady stream of ships landing at a hidden facility carved into the moon's craggy landscape. "Command, this is Reeves," he whispered into his comm. "We've located the Purifier base. It's bigger than we thought. Multiple hangars, heavy defenses. They're not hiding anymore." As Logan's team gathered intel, disaster struck. A Purifier patrol stumbled upon their position. Plasma bolts sizzled past Logan's head as he shouted, "Fall back! We've been made!" The operatives sprinted across Krios's uneven terrain, ducking behind rock formations as Purifier troops gave chase. Logan's heart pounded as he heard the whine of assault speeders closing in. "Command! We need immediate extraction!" Walter paced the bridge of his flagship, the Defiance, as reports flooded in. "Logan's team is compromised," he announced to his officers, "but they've confirmed Vortak's presence and the scale of his operation. We can't wait any longer." He turned to his tactical officer. "Mobilize the fleet. We're taking the fight to Krios." The Alliance Armada dropped out of hyperspace above Krios, immediately engaging the Purifier forces. Walter stood at the center of the Defiance's bridge, issuing rapid-fire orders as the battle unfolded around them. "Concentrate fire on their lead dreadnought," he commanded. "Fighter squadrons, clear us a path to the surface." On Krios, Logan Reeves linked up with Kintarian and Turelian special forces. They fought their way through the streets of Vortak's fortified citadel, energy weapons flashing in the dim corridors. "Push forward!" Logan shouted, leading the charge. They burst into the control center, only to find themselves surrounded by Vortak's elite guard. Vortak himself stood behind a force field, sneering at the Alliance troops. "You're too late," he growled. "Soon the gamma-ray weapon on Archon 5 will cleanse the galaxy of the human plague once and for all." Before Logan could respond, the citadel rocked with explosions. Walter Green led a strike team through the breach, laying down suppressing fire. "Logan, status report!" "Sir, Vortak's planning to use an old Mizarian weapon to wipe out human colonies," Logan shouted over the din of battle. With a final decisive move, Indus subdued Vortak. "It's over," he said, breathing heavily. Walter stepped forward. surveying the captured Purifier leader. "Vortak, by the authority of the Alliance, you are under arrest. Your war ends here." Outside, the remaining Purifier ships found themselves boxed in by the Alliance fleet. Walter opened a channel to all frequencies. "Attention, Purifier forces. Your leader is in custody. Stand down and prepare to be boarded. This is your only chance for mercy." As the last Purifier vessels powered down their weapons, Walter allowed himself a small sigh of relief. The immediate threat was over, but he knew the real work of securing lasting peace was just beginning. Walter Green stood on the balcony of his home on Elysium, gazing at the lush gardens and gleaming spires that had sprung up during his years of leadership. The gentle breeze carried the scent of alien flowers, a reminder of how far humanity had come since the dark days of the Purifier threat. His peaceful reverie shattered as his comms unit buzzed urgently. Walter's eyes narrowed as he read the incoming message: attacks on remote outposts, unidentified warships. His muscles tensed, old instincts kicking in. Hours later, Walter strode into the Federation Council chambers. The faces around the table were grim, holographic displays flickering with tactical data. Admiral Chen spoke first. "Supreme Commander Green, we're dealing with a new threat, the Zarul Imperium." Walter leaned forward, studying the grainy images of sleek predatory ships. "Tell me everything." As the briefing unfolded, Walter's mind raced. The Zarul's sudden aggression, their advanced technology, the devastation left in their wake, it all pointed to a carefully planned offensive. "We can't let them gain a foothold," Walter said, his voice cutting through the worried murmurs. "I'll lead a strike force to push them back." The Council voted unanimously to reinstate Walter as Supreme Commander. As he left the chambers, he keyed his comms. "Logan, Valen, gear up. We've got work to do." Days later, Walter stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Defiance, as it dropped out of hyperspace near Altair Prime. A maelstrom of energy weapons and explosions greeted them, Zarul ships swarming the Federation's defensive lines. "All ships, execute attack pattern Sigma," Walter barked. The Allied fleet surged forward, smaller craft darting between the hulking Zarul vessels, striking weak points and vanishing before the enemy could retaliate. For a moment it seemed to be working. Then a massive Zarul dreadnought emerged from the chaos, dwarfing even the largest Federation ships. "Evasive maneuvers," Walter shouted, but it was too late. A wave of gravitational distortion slammed into the Defiance, overloading systems and sending crew members sprawling. As Walter pulled himself up, clinging to a sparking console, he saw the Zarul forces pressing their advantage, pushing towards the shipyards of Altair Prime. Walter's blood ran cold. He opened a secure channel to Logan and Valen. "We need to take out that dreadnought, now." Logan's stealth team slipped through the battle undetected, latching onto the massive Zarul vessel. Meanwhile, Walter and Valen led a squadron of bombers, weaving through a hail of energy bolts. Walter gritted his teeth, lining up the shot. "Fire!" The precision strike carved a hole in the dreadnought's defenses. Logan's team seized the moment, infiltrating the ship as Walter and Valen's bombers pounded its vital systems. Alarms blared throughout the Zarul vessel as its reactor went critical. Logan's voice crackled over the comms. "We're clear. Light it up." The Allied fleet unleashed a devastating barrage, tearing the dreadnought apart. As the explosion faded, Walter scanned for any sign of Archon Malgor, but the Zarul leader had vanished. With their flagship destroyed, the remaining Zarul ships scattered. Walter pressed the attack, driving them back beyond the borders of Federation space. In the aftermath, as damage reports flooded in, Walter knew this was only the beginning. He turned to Indus, his expression hard. "What do you know about the Zarul's origins?" Indus hesitated. "There are rumors of an ancient world, a weapon that could turn the tide." Walter nodded grimly. "Prep a scout ship, we're going to find it." As they prepared to venture into uncharted space, Walter cast one last look at the star map, Elysium's location burning bright. Whatever was out there, whatever the cost, he would protect humanity's new home. Walter Green stood on the bridge of the Defiance, his eyes fixed on the swirling chaos of the uncharted nebula before them. The viewscreen flickered with static, sensors struggling to penetrate the dense cosmic fog. "Status report," Walter barked, his voice tight with tension. Lieutenant Kira Chen's fingers flew over her console. "Sir, our navigation systems are barely functional. The nebula's interfering with—" A violent shudder rocked the ship, cutting her off. Crew members stumbled, grasping for handholds as klaxons blared. "Radiation storm," Indus shouted from his station. "Shields holding at 60%. Walter gripped the command rail, his nucleus tightening. "Steady as she goes, push through it." For agonizing minutes, the task force battled the tempest of charged particles. Walter could hear the hull groaning under the assault. Finally, they emerged into a pocket of relative calm. "Sir," Chen called out, her voice hushed with awe, "you need to see this." The viewscreen cleared, revealing a graveyard of shattered worlds. Fragments of planets drifted in eerie silence, some as large as moons, others no bigger than pebbles. Exotic energy readings pulsed from the debris field, defying known laws of physics. Indus stepped forward, his scales reflecting the ghostly light of the nebula. "Walter, look at the pattern of the debris. It's too uniform, too precise." He turned to his communications officer. "Get me Logan, we need boots on the ground." Hours later, Walter watched from the Defiance as Logan's team explored the surface of a massive planetoid. Their suits' cameras transmitted a haunting landscape of twisted metal and crystalline structures, all bearing the scars of unimaginable violence. "Commander," Logan's voice crackled over the comms, "we found something. It's not like anything we've ever seen." The camera panned to reveal a towering obelisk, its surface etched with intricate mathematical symbols. As Logan's team approached, a shimmering energy field sprang to life, enveloping the entire region. "Fall back," Walter ordered, a chill running down his spine. "That's a weapon signature. We're looking at the aftermath of whatever wiped this civilization out." As the team retreated, a ping echoed through the Defiance's sensors. Walter's head snapped up. "What was that?" Chen's eyes widened. "Sir, it's a signal coming from deeper in the nebula." Walter's eyes sharp. He knew the risks, knew his officers would advise caution, but the fate of humanity hung in the balance. "Plot a course," he commanded. "Whatever's out there, we need to find it before Malgor does." The task force plunged deeper into the nebula, following the mysterious signal. With each passing moment, the pings grew stronger, more insistent. Then, without warning, the nebula parted, revealing a sight that left even the veteran crew speechless. A colossal structure loomed before them, dwarfing even the largest Federation shipyards. Its architecture defied description, blending organic curves with impossibly precise geometries. This was no mere ship. It was a relic of a civilization so advanced it bordered on the mythical. Walter Green's boots clanged against the metal floor as he and Indus sprinted through the labyrinthine corridors of the precursor factory ship. The air crackled with energy discharges as automated defense systems targeted the intruders. "This way," Indus called out, his scales gleaming under the flickering emergency lights. They ducked into a narrow service conduit, barely avoiding a barrage of plasma bolts. As they crawled through the cramped space, Walter's mind raced. The holographic archives they'd uncovered painted a chilling picture of the precursor's downfall. He could still see the images of entire worlds reduced to rubble, billions of lives snuffed out in an instant. They emerged into a vast chamber dominated by a pulsing crystalline structure, the factory ship's AI core. Walter's fingers flew across his datapad, establishing an uplink to the ancient systems. "Indus, cover me!" he shouted as he began to sift through the massive data streams. The Mizarian warrior took up in defensive position, his energy rifle at the ready. "Hurry, Walter. I don't know how long Logan can hold them off." A series of explosions rocked the ship. Walter's comms crackled to life. "Commander," Logan's voice was strained, punctuated by weapons fire. "We can't hold the perimeter much longer." "Understood, Logan. Fall back to extraction point Beta. We're almost done here. Walter worked furiously, racing against the AI's termination protocols. He could feel the weight of history pressing down on him, the fate of countless worlds hanging in the balance. "There," he exclaimed, initiating the data transfer to the Federation fleet. "Location coordinates sent. Now we just need to—" His words were cut off as a massive energy surge tore through the chamber. Indus leaped into action, tackling Walter to the ground as arcs of lightning danced across the AI core. Walter scrambled to his feet, his uniform singed. "We need to overload the AI before it can complete the wipe. Indus, that feedback pulse. Now." The Mizarian warrior jammed his energy rifle into a power conduit, unleashing a devastating surge of energy. The AI core flickered and sparked, its defenses momentarily disabled. For a precious few seconds, Walter had control. His fingers danced across the holographic interface, issuing commands to the factory ship's ancient systems. But the victory was short-lived. Alarms blared as the ship's autonomous security measures reasserted themselves. Energy barriers sprang to life, cutting off their escape routes. "Time to go," Walter said, grabbing Indus by the arm. They sprinted through the closing gaps, diving and rolling to avoid the lethal energy fields. They burst out of the central core, just as the final barrier slammed shut behind them. Walter's lungs burned as they raced towards their extraction point, the ship's corridors becoming a blur. They reached the hangar bay, where Logan and the surviving members of the strike team were holding off waves of automated drones. Walter and Indus dove into their craft, the engines already spooling up. "Get us out of here," Walter shouted to the pilot as the hangar doors began to close. The small craft shot out of the factory ship, narrowly avoiding the massive energy beams that lanced out after them. As they reunited with the surviving task force elements, Walter's sensors lit up with new contacts. "Sir," his tactical officer reported, "multiple warships dropping out of warp. It's Malgor's armada." Walter's teeth clenched as he watched the Zaral fleet emerge, their sleek predatory ships converging on the factory ship, but a grim smile played at the corners of his mouth. "Open a channel to all Federation frequencies," he ordered. "It's time to spring our trap." Walter's fingers flew across the shuttle's flickering control panel, coaxing every ounce of power from the failing systems. Sparks erupted from an overloaded circuit, filling the cramped cockpit with acrid smoke. "Indus, reroute auxiliary power to the engines," Walter shouted, his eyes fixed on the swarm of Zaral hunter-killer squadrons closing in. The Mizarian warrior worked feverishly, his scales glistening with sweat. "Done, but we're running on fumes, Walter. One more hit and we're space dust." The shuttle lurched violently as a near miss from a Zaral energy weapon grazed their hull. Walter banked hard, weaving through a field of twisted debris from the battle raging around them. "Hang on!" he yelled, punching the throttle. The battered craft shot forward, engines screaming in protest. As they cleared the debris field, Walter's hands danced across the comms panel. "This is Commander Green to Admiral Rhodes. Transmitting factory ship coordinates now. Be advised, Zaral forces are attempting to seize control." The Admiral's voice crackled through the static. "Understood, Commander. Hold tight. We're inbound." Walter watched the sensor display as the Federation fleet dropped out of warp, immediately engaging the Zaral armada. The space around them lit up with weapons fire, creating a deadly light show against the backdrop of stars. Inside the ancient factory ship, Malgor's invasion forces swarmed through cavernous halls of gleaming metal and pulsing energy conduits. A Zaral officer, his exoskeleton overflowing with cybernetic enhancements, approached a central computer core. "My lord," he called out, "we've located the main interface for the weapon systems." Malgor strode forward, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. "Excellent. Begin the activation sequence." The officer's appendages flew across the alien controls. Suddenly the core erupted in a blinding flash of energy. Cascading waves of power surged through the ship's systems, overloading circuits and triggering fail-safes. Malgor staggered back as emergency force fields sprang to life, cutting off entire sections of the ship. "What's happening?" he demanded. The officer frantically tried to regain control. "Unknown, my lord, the systems are in chaos, we can't—" His words were cut off as another surge of energy coursed through the ship, leaving the Zarul forces trapped and isolated. Outside, Walter's shuttle narrowly avoided another volley from the pursuing hunter-killers. He glanced at the tactical display, relaying information to Admiral Rhodes. "The factory ship's defenses are fragmented," he reported. "Multiple sections have been isolated by internal force fields." Rhodes's voice came through, tense but controlled. "Understood, Commander. We're engaging the main Zarul fleet now. Stand by for extraction." As the battle raged, Logan Reeves and his Spec Ops team breached the factory ship's outer hull. They moved swiftly through the alien corridors, linking up with trapped human work crews. "Listen up," Logan addressed the assembled group. "We've got one shot at this. We're going to overload the remaining power nodes and trigger an EMP. It's our only chance to stop the Zarul from activating that weapon." The team moved from compartment to compartment, placing explosive charges at key junctions. Logan's heart raced as they narrowly avoided detection by Zarul security drones. "That's the last one," his second-in-command reported. "We need to move now." Logan nodded, activating his comms. "All teams fall back to the extraction point, detonation in 60 seconds. They sprinted through the maze-like structure, diving into the waiting transport pods just as the timer hit 0. A series of explosions rocked the factory ship, unleashing a devastating electromagnetic pulse. The effect was immediate. Zarul systems throughout the ship went dark. On the bridge of his flagship, Malgor watched in horror as his fleet's weapons and shields failed. Admiral Rhodes seized the moment. "All ships, press the attack, target their disabled vessels." The Federation fleet surged forward, unleashing a relentless barrage on the stricken Zarul armada. Walter and Indus watched from their battered shuttle as the tide of battle turned. "Look," Indus said, pointing to a cluster of Zarul ships surrounding a massive flagship. "That must be Malgor's command vessel." Walter nodded grimly. "And it's about to have some very unwelcome visitors." Federation Marines swarmed aboard the Zarul flagship, battling their way through its alien corridors. They found Malgor in the ship's inner sanctum, surrounded by his elite guards. As the last pockets of resistance were mopped up, Walter and Indus's shuttle was finally recovered by a Federation search and rescue team. They stumbled out of the craft, exhausted but alive. Walter looked out at the debris-strewn battlefield, the precursor factory ship now a lifeless husk. He turned to Indus, a weary smile on his face. "We did it, old friend. We stopped them." As their rescue ship set course for Federation space, Walter began to compile his report. The revelations about the precursors and the Zarul's plans caused great concern on his mind. He knew that while they had won this battle, the war for humanity's future was just getting started. The Federation starship Defiant cut through the inky void of space, its hull scarred from recent battles. Inside the command briefing room, Walter Green stood before a holographic display, addressing the assembled Federation Council members. "Councillors, the threat we face is beyond anything we've encountered," Walter said, his voice steady but tinged with urgency. He gestured to the rotating image of the precursor factory ship. "This superweapon was just the beginning. Who knows what other apocalyptic artifacts are out there waiting to be discovered?" Walter tapped a series of commands into the display. New images flashed to life. Star charts, alien schematics, fragments of precursor code. "We need a dedicated task force, multi-species, top clearance, with the resources to scour every lead on precursor technology." The council chambers buzzed with hushed conversations. Finally, Councillor Talara of Vulcan spoke. "Your proposal is logical, Commander. The risk of inaction is too great. You will have your task force." Weeks later, Walter stood in the newly christened Precursor Research Division. Banks of quantum computers hummed, processing terabytes of alien data. He watched as Logan Reeves, his old comrade in arms, calibrated a holotable for mission planning. "Logan," Walter called out, "I need you heading up our field operations. We'll be pushing into uncharted space, dealing with environmental hazards most people can't even imagine. Logan nodded, a grim smile on his weathered face. Just like old times, eh? Don't worry, I'll keep our people alive out there. Across the room, Indus pored over star maps, his scaled fingers tracing possible routes through dangerous sectors. Walter, I've identified several promising leads. My contacts in the Outer Rim have whispered of strange ruins, shunned by even the most desperate salvagers. Walter clasped his friend's shoulder. Good work, Indus. We'll need every scrap of intel we can get. At a nearby workstation, Max Ryder's fingers flew across holographic keyboards. The young scientist's eyes were bloodshot from countless hours decrypting precursor databases. "Commander," he called out excitedly, "I've cracked another layer of encryption. You need to see this." Walter hurried over, peering at the stream of alien characters flooding Max's screen. "What am I looking at, Max?" "Coordinates, sir. To what I believe is a precursor archive vault. It's on a rogue planetoid way out in the galactic halo." Walter's pulse quickened. "Prep a team, we move out immediately." Days later, the Defiant dropped out of warp in a system devoid of starlight. Before them loomed a monstrous gas giant, and orbiting it, a tiny, frozen world. "Scan for Zarul activity," Walter ordered as they approached the planetoid. "Multiple contacts," the sensor officer reported. "Zarul hunter-killer drones, closing fast." Walter gripped the arms of his command chair. "Evasive maneuvers, get us to the surface." The Defiant plunged through the planetoid's thin atmosphere, corkscrewing to avoid sizzling energy beams from the pursuing drones. They skimmed over a landscape of jagged ice formations, searching for any sign of precursor architecture. "There," Indus shouted, pointing to a flickering distortion in the ice. "Some kind of cloaking field." Walter nodded to his pilot. "Take us in." They landed near the distortion, the away team quickly donning extreme environment suits. Walter led the charge across the frozen surface, each step sending up plumes of crystalline dust. As they neared the cloaking field, the ice beneath their feet began to glow with strange symbols. Walter felt a tingling sensation as they passed through the camouflage barrier, revealing a massive door set into the planetoid's surface. For days they worked, bypassing layer after layer of precursor security. The team took shifts, fighting off waves of Zarul drones that had tracked them to the site. Finally, with a great grinding of ancient mechanisms, the vault door slid open. Walter led the team inside, their helmet lights illuminating a cavernous chamber. Row upon row of towering monoliths stretched into the darkness, each humming with stored data. "My God," Max whispered, his scanner going wild. "The amount of information here, it's incalculable." As the team began the arduous process of copying and translating the precursor archives, Walter reviewed the first batch of decrypted files. His blood ran cold as he realized the true scope of what they'd discovered. Logan let out a low whistle. "Those are suicide missions, Walter?" As they loaded the last of the data cores onto their ship, Walter took one final look at the ancient vault. He couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of a journey that would reshape the galaxy forever. Walter Green stood before the Federation Council, his voice echoing through the grand chamber as he presented his proposal. "Councillors, the threat we face demands immediate action. I propose the creation of Guardian Command, a specialized task force dedicated to locating and securing precursor technology before it falls into the wrong hands." The council members leaned forward, their faces a mix of concern and intrigue. After hours of heated debate, they reached a decision. Guardian Command was born. Weeks later, Walter strode through the newly established Guardian Command headquarters. Holographic displays flickered with data from across the galaxy. He approached Logan Reeves, who was studying a star chart. "Logan, we've got a lead," Walter said, pulling up a holographic image of a binary star system. "Energy readings off the charts. Could be precursor tech." Logan nodded, his eyes scanning the data. "I'll assemble a team. We'll scout it out." The Guardian Command ship dropped out of warp near the twin stars. Logan and his team of human and Kintarian operatives crowded the bridge, staring in awe at the massive structure before them. "My God," Logan breathed. "It's like a giant ring orbiting both stars." Scans revealed the true nature of the megastructure. "Neutronium alloy," the science officer reported. "Our weapons won't even scratch it." Walter's voice crackled over the comms. "Deploy the probes, find us a way in." They watched as robotic probes approached the ring. Suddenly, energy beams lashed out from hidden emplacements, vaporizing the probes in seconds. Back at command, Indus approached Walter, his scaled face creased with worry. "Walter, we should reconsider. If we provoke this facility, the consequences could be catastrophic." Walter shook his head. "We can't risk letting this fall into enemy hands. Logan, prepare for boarding action." On the Guardian command ship, Logan briefed his team. "We're going in hot. Mark Ryder's plasma lances will cut us an entry point. Once inside, we push for the power core." Armored troops stood ready as searing beams of energy carved through the neutronium hull. With a hiss of equalizing pressure, Logan led the charge. They burst into alien corridors, immediately under fire from swarms of defense drones. Energy weapons crackled, filling the air with ozone and the screams of wounded soldiers. Inch by bloody inch, they fought their way deeper into the station. Logan split his forces, leading one team towards a power distribution node, while Mark Ryder's tech crew worked to disable the reactor's autonomous systems. On the planet below, Walter coordinated the ground assault. Armored landers touched down, securing transmission relays and outlying facilities. He watched the tactical display, his eyebrows furrowed as casualty reports streamed in. Inside the station, Logan's team found themselves pinned down by relentless neutron laser fire. "We're cut off," his second-in-command shouted over the din of battle. With a primal yell, they charged forward, overwhelming the defensive positions through sheer force of will. In the command center, Indus worked feverishly at his console. "Walter, I'm attempting to hack their systems. It's our only chance to shut this place down before it fully activates." Walter nodded grimly. "Do it." Indus's fingers flew across the holographic interface. Warning klaxons blared as auxiliary reactors began to power up. "It's now or never," Indus muttered. With a final keystroke, he unleashed the cyber attack. The station's systems flickered, then went dark. Mark Ryder's team swooped in, locking down the core and preventing a security wipe of the ancient databases. As the dust settled, Walter surveyed the captured facility. Hazmat teams moved through the corridors, securing caches of terrifyingly advanced weaponry. "This will be our new forward base," Walter announced. "From here, we'll coordinate our efforts to contain any other precursor sites we discover." Later, as Walter prepared his report for the Federation Council, Indus approached him once more. "Walter," he said softly, "I fear we may have opened Pandora's box. If there are any remnants of the precursors still out there, we may have just announced our presence to them." Walter met his friend's gaze, a chill running down his spine as he contemplated the vast unknown threats that might still lurk in the depths of space. Walter Green stood before the massive holographic display in Guardian Command's war room, his eyes fixed on the swirling vortex of data streaming in from their newly secured precursor Ringworld depot. The air hummed with tension as analysts and technicians worked feverishly to process the influx of ancient information. Indus tapped a series of commands into his datapad, bringing up a new display. "My network just intercepted these transmissions. It's the Zarul. They're making moves, trying to uncover precursor data of their own." Walter's heart made as he studied the intercepted messages. Fragmented code and cryptic references scrolled past, each one a potential threat to galactic stability. "If they get their hands on even a fraction of what we've found," Walter trailed off, the implications too dire to voice. He keyed his comms. "Logan, assemble your strike team, we're going hunting." Hours later, Logan Reeves stood in the drop bay of the stealth frigate Shadow Dancer, briefing his team as they prepared to infiltrate the Zarul stronghold. "Listen up," Logan barked, his voice carrying over the whine of warming engines. "Intel puts the enemy base in this asteroid cluster. We go in fast, we go in quiet. Our primary objective is to neutralize their data mining operation and secure any precursor intel they've managed to dig up." The Shadow Dancer slipped through the asteroid field, its advanced stealth systems rendering it nearly invisible to sensors. As they approached the target, Logan's team readied their gear, checking weapons and sealing pressure suits. With a hiss of equalizing pressure, the airlock opened. Logan led the charge, propelling himself through the vacuum towards a concealed entrance in the asteroid's pockmarked surface. Inside, alarms blared as Zaral defenders scrambled to repel the attack. Energy weapons sizzled through the air, leaving scorch marks on ancient rock walls. "Push forward," Logan shouted, ducking behind a twisted piece of alien metal. His team advanced methodically, clearing room after room of the labyrinthine facility. In a secure data center deep within the asteroid, Logan's second-in-command called out, "Sir, you need to see this." Logan rushed over, his eyes widening as he took in the bank of archaic data cores pulsing with ethereal light. "By the stars," he breathed. "What have they found?" Back at Guardian Command, Walter pored over the recovered data, his face pale in the glow of holographic displays. "It's coordinates," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "to another precursor installation. Something massive." Indus leaned in, his reptilian eyes narrowing as he studied the readouts. "A superforge built around a supernova remnant? The computational power of such a construct would be incalculable." Walter nodded grimly. "And if it fell into the wrong hands, or worse, if it reactivated on its own?" He straightened, his voice steadying as he issued orders. "Assemble the fleet. Every ship we can muster. We're heading into the Hyralius void." Days later, Walter stood on the bridge of the Guardian Command flagship as it led an armada of unprecedented size through the treacherous expanse of uncharted space. Exotic radiation battered their shields, while electromagnetic interference played havoc with their sensors. "Steady as she goes," Walter commanded, his eyes never leaving the main view screen. Suddenly the fleet erupted from a roiling cloud of stellar debris. Gasps echoed across the bridge as they beheld the impossible sight before them. A colossal structure dominated the vista, dwarfing even the largest ships in the Guardian Command fleet. Its surface writhed with impossible geometries, defying the laws of physics as it encapsulated the frozen remnants of a stellar cataclysm. "My God," Indus whispered, his scaled hands flying over his console. "It's over 10,000 kilometers in diameter. The energy readings, they're off the charts." Walter opened his mouth to respond, but before he could utter a word, a blinding flash of light erupted from the precursor megastructure. Tachyon particles flooded their sensors, overloading delicate equipment. Reality itself seemed to twist and buckle as quantum force shifts rippled out from the awakening colossus. Walter watched in horror as entire capital ships simply ceased to exist, their atoms scattered across multiple dimensions. As the surviving ships of the Guardian Command fleet turned to flee, Walter saw Indus's cruiser, struck by a tendril of warped space-time. The vessel's hull crumpled like paper, its engines sputtering as it fell behind. "Indus," Walter called out, directing his command shuttle towards the stricken ship. Walter watched in horror as Indus's cruiser crumpled under the onslaught of warped space-time. The comm channels crackled with static and screams as ship after ship vanished from existence. He gripped the arms of his command chair, squeezing hard, as reality itself bent around them. The engines of the Guardian Command flagship roared to life, straining against the quantum maelstrom. Walter felt his stomach lurch as they accelerated away from the awakening colossus. On the display, he watched helplessly as more ships winked out of existence. Hours later, the battered remnants of the Guardian Command fleet limped into the relative safety of the Ringworld depot. Walter stood in the docking bay, surveying the damage. Scorched hulls, twisted metal, and shell-shocked crews surrounded him. Indus approached, his scales singed and his uniform torn. "Walter," he said, his voice hoarse, "the casualty reports are coming in. It's bad." Walter nodded grimly. "I know, but we don't have time to mourn. We need to figure out what we're dealing with." In the command center, holographic displays flickered with data streams from the encounter. Walter and Indus huddled with their top scientists, poring over the readings. "Look at these energy signatures," one analyst said, gesturing to a chaotic graph. "It's like nothing we've ever seen before." Indus leaned in, his eyes narrowing. "The spatial distortion, they're off the charts. It's as if the very fabric of reality was being warped." Walter paced the room, his mind racing. "What are we dealing with here? Some kind of self-evolving AI?" A junior scientist spoke up, her voice trembling. "Sir, long-range scans are showing activity. The forge is consuming nearby stellar bodies. It's growing." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Walter turned to Indus, his face grim. "We need a plan. If we don't stop this thing, it could consume everything in its path." Indus nodded. "I'll contact our top engineers. We need weapons that can counter this level of technology." Over the next few days, Walter threw himself into planning their counterattack. He met with Logan Reeves in the war room, surrounded by tactical displays. "Logan, I need you to lead an insertion team," Walter said, pulling up a 3D map of the superforge. "We're going to hit it from multiple angles." Logan studied the display, his brow furrowed. "How do we even approach that thing? Our ships were torn apart last time." Walter gestured to a swirling vortex on the map. "We've identified a subspace slipstream. It's risky, but it might get you close enough to deploy the new weapons Mark Ryder's team is working on." As Logan left to prep his team, Walter turned his attention to his own mission. He stood in the engineering bay, watching as technicians swarmed over a massive gravity sled. "This better work," Walter muttered to himself. He knew the plan was a long shot, but they were out of options. The fate of the stars hung in the balance. Days later, Walter stood on the bridge of his command ship as the Guardian fleets prepared to jump. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. "All ships, this is Green," he said into the fleet-wide comm. "You know the stakes. Let's go save reality." With a flash of energy, the fleets vanished into subspace, hurtling towards their destiny. The Guardian command flagship limped through the void, its hull scarred and blackened from the brutal engagement. Walter Green stood at the viewport, his eyes fixed on the swirling cosmic debris left in the wake of their desperate victory. "Status report," he called out, his voice hoarse from hours of shouting orders. A young ensign approached, her uniform singed and torn. "Sir, we've accounted for all surviving ships. The casualty lists are extensive." Walter nodded grimly, his fists tight. He turned to face the bridge crew, each face etched with exhaustion and grief. "We've paid a heavy price, but we've stopped an unimaginable threat. Remember that." The ship shuddered as it entered warp, leaving behind the graveyard of shattered planets and fallen comrades. Walter made his way to the command center, where Indus waited with the latest data streams. "The Deliverance platform's core is completely inert," Indus reported, his scaled fingers dancing across a holographic interface. "No signs of regeneration or secondary protocols." Indus pulled up a galactic map, dotted with ominous red markers. "We've tracked all known dispersal patterns. Cleanup crews are en route to neutralize any remaining ordnance." A proximity alert blared, cutting through the tense atmosphere. Walter spun towards the main view screen as a battered frigate limped into view. Walter keyed the comm. "Logan, report. What's your status?" Static crackled before Logan's voice came through, weak but alive. "We made it, sir, barely. Lost a lot of good people in that hellstorm." "Dock immediately," Walter ordered. "We need every survivor accounted for." Hours later, Walter stood in the medical bay, surrounded by the wounded and shell-shocked remnants of Logan's strike force. The air was thick with the acrid smell of burn gel and disinfectant. Logan approached, his face gaunt and his uniform in tatters. "Sir, I don't know how we survived that. The antimatter detonations, the spatial distortions. It was like reality itself was tearing apart." Walter clasped the man's shoulder. "You did what had to be done, Logan. Your team's sacrifice saved countless lives." As Walter made his rounds, offering what comfort he could to the survivors, Indus entered with a data tablet. "Walter, we've compiled the initial after-action reports. The Federation Council is demanding answers." Walter took the tablet, scrolling through the grim statistics. Ships lost, lives extinguished, entire sectors of space rendered uninhabitable. The cost of victory greatly troubled on his conscience. "Set course for the Ringworld Depot," Walter said, his voice low but firm. "We need to regroup, repair, and prepare for whatever comes next." As the Guardian command fleet limped home, Walter retreated to his quarters. He stood before a star chart, tracing the path of destruction left by the Deliverance platform. The vast emptiness of the local void seemed to mock him, hiding untold horrors from ages past. A knock at the door roused him from his dark thoughts. Indus entered, carrying a bottle of Arcturian whiskey and 2 glasses. "I thought you could use this," Indus said, pouring a generous measure for each of them. Walter accepted the drink gratefully. "To absent friends," he said, raising his glass. As they sipped the fiery liquid, Walter's mind raced with the implications of their discovery. Indus, if one Deliverance platform could do this much damage, how many more are out there? What other doomsday weapons did the precursors leave behind? Indus set down his glass, his reptilian eyes gleaming in the low light. "I don't know, old friend, but I fear we've only scratched the surface of the precursor's legacy." Walter turned back to the star chart, his grit hardening. "Then we keep searching. We find these weapons, we neutralize them regardless of the cost. The galaxy is counting on us, whether they know it or not." The Guardian command flagship surged forward, carrying its battered but unbroken crew towards an uncertain future. As Walter Green gazed out at the star-studded expanse, he knew that their greatest challenges and darkest discoveries still lay ahead. The Guardian Command Ringworld Depot bustled with frantic activity as Walter Green's battered fleet limped into dock. Scorched hull plating and twisted metal greeted repair crews swarming over the surviving ships. In the medical bay, rows of stasis pods hummed softly, preserving the lives of Logan Reeves's critically injured strike team members. Walter strode through the crowded corridors, his face etched with exhaustion. He entered the command center, where holographic displays flickered with damage reports and casualty lists. Indus looked up from a data terminal, his scaled features tight with concern. Indus tapped a few keys, bringing up a stark inventory. "Over half the armada is combat ineffective. Logan's teams—" He paused, searching for words. "We're doing everything we can, but supplies are stretched thin." Walter nodded grimly. He keyed the comm system, opening a channel to the Federation Council. The faces of a dozen representatives materialized before him, their expressions a mix of relief and apprehension. "Councillors," Walter began, "we've neutralized the Deliverance platform, but at great cost. We need reinforcements, resources. There could be more precursor weapons out there, and we're in no shape to face them." A human representative leaned forward. "Commander Green, your actions were courageous, but we can't risk awakening more of these constructs. We'll authorize a limited supplement from Allied Homeworld Defense Forces, nothing more." Walter's eyes hardened, but he kept his voice level. "Understood, Council, we'll make do." As the transmission ended, Walter turned to Indus. "It's not what we hoped for, but it's what we have. Start integrating the new personnel immediately. And I want every scrap of data on potential precursor activity. We can't afford to be caught off guard again." Days passed in a blur of triage, repairs, and tactical simulations. Walter pored over personnel files, trying to squeeze every ounce of combat effectiveness from his patchwork fleet. In the labs, Indus coordinated with sensor technicians, sifting through terabytes of long-range scans. An alarm cut through the air, jerking Walter from a fitful sleep. He sprinted to the command center, where Indus was hunched over a pulsing holomap. "We've got something," Indus said, his voice tense. "Energy spikes in the Holden spiral. It's big, Walter, really big." Walter's eyes narrowed as he studied the readouts. "How long until it fully activates?" Hours, maybe less, Indus replied. Walter's hand hovered over the fleet-wide comm. All ships, prepare for immediate departure. We're heading into the Holden Spiral. The journey through hyperspace was tense, crew members double-checking weapons systems and running last-minute diagnostics. As they dropped back into real space, a collective gasp echoed through the command deck. Before them loomed a construct of impossible scale and complexity. Its surface writhed and shifted, defying the laws of physics. Tendrils of energy lashed out, pulverizing nearby asteroids. "What in God's name is that thing?" a junior officer whispered. Walter's face was grim as he recognized the telltale signs of precursor technology. It's a hyperconstruct, designed to rewrite the fundamental laws of physics. He turned to his tactical officer. "Arm quantum disruptors. We need to hit it with everything we've got before it fully awakens." Indus's console erupted in a cacophony of alarms. "Walter, it's starting. The hyperconstruct is initiating its primary sequence." Walter's voice cut through the rising panic. "All ships, push your warp lenses to maximum. We have to disrupt those resonator waves now." The fleet surged forward, weapons blazing as they raced against time to stop the cosmic abomination from unleashing its reality-warping power. The Defiance shuddered as another wave of hyperspatial energy slammed into its shields. Walter Green gripped the command console, his nucleus tightening as he surveyed the chaos unfolding before him. "Status report," he barked, his voice barely audible over the cacophony of alarms and groaning metal. A young ensign, her face streaked with sweat and grime, called out from her station. "Sir, hull integrity at 47%. We've lost contact with decks 12 through 18. Walter's eyes narrowed as he watched Logan Reeves's squadrons dart across the viewscreen, their weapons blazing against the writhing surface of the hyperconstruct. Explosions blossomed across its fractal geometries, momentarily disrupting its transmutations. "Vandus, what's our window?" Walter asked, his gaze fixed on the battle raging outside. The Kintarian's scaled fingers flew across his console. "Logan's assault has bought us minutes at best. The construct's resonator plane waves are already adapting." Walter nodded grimly. "Signal the second wave. We go now." The Defiance surged forward, leading a phalanx of ships towards the breach opened by Logan's barrage. On the engineering deck, Mark Ryder and his team worked feverishly, their hands a blur as they calibrated the antimatter injectors. "Containment fields holding steady," Mark reported through the comm. "Ready on your mark, sir." Walter took a deep breath. "All ships execute attack pattern Delta, fire at will." Streams of coruscating energy erupted from the Guardian fleet, lancing towards the hyperconstruct's exposed mooring points. For a heart-stopping moment, it seemed to work. The construct's surface rippled and distorted, its anchors to normal space-time visibly straining. The hyperconstruct lashed out, unleashing a maelstrom of torsional force that tore through space itself. Walter watched in horror as nearby ships were shredded effortlessly, their crews silently screaming as they were sucked into the void. "We've lost primary power," Indus shouted over the din. "Multiple hull breaches detected." Walter struggled to his feet, tasting blood in his mouth. "All hands, abandon ship. Get to the escape shuttles." As the crew scrambled to evacuate, Walter's eyes were drawn to the viewscreen. Logan's fighters swarmed around the construct, drawing its fire and buying precious seconds for the retreating forces. "Logan, fall back," Walter ordered through the static-filled comm. "That's an order." Stumbling into the last shuttle with Indus at his side, Walter cast one final look at the devastation they were leaving behind. The hyperconstruct loomed larger than ever, its fury undiminished as it continued its relentless expansion. As the shuttle rocketed away from the doomed Defiance, Walter's mind raced. They had failed to stop the construct, and the cost had been catastrophic. How many ships lost? How many good people gone in an instant? The shuttle shuddered as it pushed through the construct's event horizon, the fabric of reality itself seeming to stretch and warp around them. Walter closed his eyes, grief and exhaustion threatening to overwhelm him. Walter opened his eyes, his face a mask of grim commitment. We regroup, we rebuild, and we find a way to stop these things regardless of the cost. As the shuttle limped towards the distant safety of the Ringworld depot, Walter knew the real battle was just beginning. The hyperconstruct was only the latest threat, and he feared it wouldn't be the last. The weight of the galaxy's future pressed down on him, heavier than ever before. The acrid smell of ozone filled Walter Green's nostrils as he stood before the holographic display in the Defiance's command center. Faces etched with exhaustion and grief stared back at him, the remnants of Guardian Command's once proud fleet. "We've lost too many," Walter said, his voice low and tight, "but we can't give up now." "The Thyla cluster," Indus explained. "Our long-range scans picked up gravitational anomalies unlike anything we've seen before." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Another precursor weapon, stirring from its ancient slumber. Mark Ryder cleared his throat. "Sir, I may have a solution." He tapped a few commands, bringing up schematics of an unfamiliar device. "It's risky, but it might be our only shot." Walter leaned in, studying the intricate diagrams. "What am I looking at, Ryder?" "A Quintarian warp-phasing eraser. They acquired the specs during the Zaral War." Ryder's eyes darted nervously to Indus. "It's not exactly Federation-approved tech." Indus hissed softly. "That's putting it mildly. This technology was banned for good reason." Walter's brow furrowed. "How does it work?" Ryder's fingers flew across the console, bringing up a simulation. "It creates a quasi-dimensional tunnel, allowing us to bypass the construct's outer defenses. We could deliver a strike team directly to its core." The room erupted in murmurs. Walter raised a hand, silencing them. "And the risks?" Ryder's face grew grim. "Extreme, sir. A millisecond miscalculation could scatter our people across dimensional fold, or worse." Walter closed his eyes, weighing the options. When he opened them, his gaze was hard. "We don't have a choice. Make it happen, Ryder." Days blurred together as the Defiance's skeleton crew worked feverishly to integrate the Quintarian tech. Walter paced the bridge, watching as 3 sleek stealth pods were maneuvered into place. "Warp tunnelers online," Ryder reported, his voice tense. "Ready on your command, sir." Walter nodded, keying the comm. "All teams, prepare for deployment. May whatever gods are out there watch over us." The Defiance dropped out of warp, and Walter's breath caught in his throat. Before them loomed a structure of impossible scale, a moon-sized sphere comprised of interlocking geometric shapes, pulsing with alien energy. "My God," someone whispered. Walter's voice cut through the stunned silence. "Launch the pods, now!" 3 streaks of light shot towards the Umita structure. For a heart-stopping moment, it seemed they might make it. Then reality itself seemed to twist and shear. Walter gripped the command rail, his nucleus tightening. "Get me a visual on Charlie Team." The view screen flickered to life, showing a hellish landscape of shifting geometries and cascading energy. In the center stood a handful of figures, their armor scorched and battered. "Keramin reporting," a voice crackled through the comm. "We're in but barely. This place, it's unlike anything we've ever seen." Walter leaned forward, his eyes scanning the chaotic tableau. "Find us a weak point, Keramin. We're counting on you." As the strike team began their desperate search, Walter could only watch and wait, knowing that with each passing second, the fate of reality itself hung in the balance. Walter's eyes burned as he stared at the tactical display, watching Charlie Team's life signs flicker erratically. The Umeta structure's interior twisted and warped, defying the laws of physics. "Keramin, report," Walter barked into the comm. Static crackled before Keramin's strained voice cut through. "Sir, we're tracking energy conduits. This place, it's alive. The walls keep shifting." Indus's fingers flew across his console. "I'm detecting a massive power signature. Coordinates incoming, Keramin." On the ground, Dox Keramin cursed as another geometric spasm sent his team sprawling. He hauled himself up, checking his armor's integrity. "Copy that, Defiance. We're moving." The strike team pushed forward. their boots clanging against ever-changing surfaces. They rounded a corner and froze. Before them pulsed a colossal nodule, dark tendrils of energy writhing from its surface. "That's our target," Mark Ryder breathed, his eyes wide. "Those uplinks, if we can sever them—" A Marine next to him suddenly screamed, his body twisting as reality itself seemed to warp around him. Karamin grabbed the man, pulling him back from the edge of madness. "Stay focused," Karamin shouted. "Ryder, prep those charges!" As Ryder's team moved in, the air shimmered. A swarm of metallic shapes materialized, hunter-killer drones, their weapon ports glowing with barely contained energy. "Contact!" a Marine yelled, opening fire. The air filled with plasma bursts and the screeching of tearing metal. Karamin's voice cut through the chaos. "Ryder, how long?" "2 minutes," Ryder shouted back, his hands a blur as he worked. "Keep them off us." The battle raged, reality itself seeming to bend and distort with each exchange of fire. A Marine screamed as a dimensional lance sliced through his armor, his body disintegrating into quantum foam. "Charges set," Ryder called out, "detonating in 3, 2... A blinding flash erupted, followed by an ear-splitting shriek that seemed to come from the very fabric of space-time. The team was thrown backward as a shockwave rippled outward. "Fall back!" Karamin roared, dragging a wounded engineer to his feet. "Back to the extraction point!" They ran, reality fracturing around them. The walls oozed and pulsed, trying to seal the damage they'd inflicted. More drones poured in, their weapons tearing through what remained of Karamin's force. The ship's main guns roared to life, lancing beams of destructive energy into the Umita structure's writhing form. Extraction pods streaked towards the breach, taking heavy fire. "Go, go, go," Karamin shouted, shoving the last of his team into a pod. He turned, firing his rifle one-handed as he backed in. Walter watched in horror as pod after pod was obliterated. "Indus!" he shouted, seeing his friend still on the tactical display. Indus sprinted for the last functioning pod, hunter-killers hot on his heels. Walter's cybernetic arm extended, grabbing Indus and hauling him aboard just as the pod's hatch sealed. Walter's eyes widened as he saw the Umita structure's form begin to twist and tear, reality itself seeming to unravel around it. The Defiance lurched as its engines engaged, tearing a hole in space-time. Behind them, the Umita structure collapsed in on itself, vanishing in a blinding flash that sent shockwaves rippling across the cosmos. Indus's eyes were somber as he replied, "Dozens, sir, out of hundreds." Walter nodded, his teeth gritted. He stared out at the stars, knowing that this battle was just one of many to come. The precursors were still out there, waiting. The acrid stench of burnt circuitry filled Walter's nostrils as the Defiance limped into the Ringworld Depot's docking bay. Exhausted crew members stumbled out, their faces etched with the weight of their Pyrrhic victory. Walter's boots clanged against the metal deck as he strode towards the command center, his mind racing with plans for repairs and regrouping. A piercing wail cut through the air, freezing Walter in his tracks. Red emergency lights bathed the corridor in an ominous glow as the station's AI blared its warning. "Alert! Massive energy signature detected in nearby system. All personnel report to emergency stations." Walter broke into a run, bursting into the command center where technicians scrambled to make sense of the readings flooding their screens. He leaned over a console, his eyes widening at the swirling mass of data before him. Indus appeared at his side, the Shinthori's scales reflecting the pulsing crimson lights. "Sir, long-range sensors are picking up unprecedented levels of exotic particles and gravimetric distortions. It appears to be multiple precursor structures activating simultaneously." Walter's eyebrows furrowed. He keyed the ship-wide comm, his voice steady despite the turmoil in his gut. "All combat-capable personnel, report to Hangar Bay immediately. This is not a drill." Minutes later, Walter stood before the ragtag remnants of his once mighty force. Dox Karamin's squad, their armor still scorched from their previous battle, stood at attention alongside the handful of remaining crew members fit for duty. "I won't lie to you," Walter said. his voice carrying across the hangar. "We're outnumbered and outgunned, but we're all that stands between humanity and extinction. Gear up and prepare for emergency slipstream jump." The corvette tore through the fabric of space-time, emerging at the outskirts of a system that defied comprehension. Walter's breath caught in his throat as he beheld the nightmarish vista before him. Massive geometric structures writhed and pulsed amidst the asteroid field, their surfaces constantly shifting and reconfiguring. Tendrils of pure energy lashed out, ensnaring nearby asteroids and drawing them into ever-expanding lattices of alien design. "Sir," a sensor technician called out, "I'm picking up a signal. It's faint, but it's definitely not precursor in origin." Walter's head snapped up. "Source?" The technician's fingers danced across his console. It's human, sir, an old emergency beacon. I'm tracing it now." The main view screen zoomed in on a twisted mass of metal embedded within one of the largest precursor structures. Walter's eyes widened as he recognized the unmistakable lines of an Explorer-class vessel, a relic from humanity's first tentative steps into the cosmos. "Life signs?" he demanded. Walter's mind raced, weighing the impossible odds against the potential payoff. He turned to Indus, his expression grim. "Take the Defiance and get clear of the system. I'm going after that ship." Indus opened his mouth to protest, but Walter cut him off. "That's an order. If we don't make it back, someone needs to warn the rest of the galaxy about what's coming." Moments later, Walter's corvette streaked towards the derelict Explorer ship, dodging arcs of energy that crackled through space. The ship bucked and shuddered as gravitational forces threatened to tear it apart. "Grapples ready!" the weapons officer shouted. Walter gripped his chair, his cybernetic arm whirring as he tensed. "Fire!" The corvette lurched as the magnetic grapples latched onto the Explorer's hull. Walter led the boarding party himself, mag boots engaging as they leapt across the void between ships. Fusion cutters flared to life, carving through layers of ancient metal. But there at the far end of the chamber, a single pod status light still glowed a feeble green. "We've got a live one," Walter shouted. "Get them out now." Walter watched as his team secured the cryopod, its occupant still sealed within. "Fall back to the corvette," he ordered. They raced back through the twisting corridors, the very fabric of reality seeming to warp around them. As they cleared the airlock, a blinding flash erupted behind them, the precursor structures aligning in a cosmic array that defied comprehension. Walter threw himself into the pilot's seat, his hands flying across the controls. The corvette's engines screamed in protest as he pushed them beyond their limits, tearing a hole in space-time mere seconds before the system behind them imploded. The ship tumbled out of slipstream, alarms blaring as systems failed across the board. But they were alive and they had their precious cargo, a survivor from humanity's distant past and perhaps the key to saving its future. The corvette's hull groaned as it materialized in Guardian Command's docking bay. Sparks rained from ruptured conduits, and the acrid stench of fried circuits filled the air. Walter stumbled out of the cockpit, his cybernetic arm whirring erratically. "Get that stasis pod to medical now," he barked, gesturing to the ancient cryo chamber they'd salvaged. Technicians swarmed the pod, carefully maneuvering it onto a hover gurney. Walter caught a glimpse of the occupant through the frosted viewport. A woman, her features eerily pristine despite the centuries that had passed. In the command center, holographic displays flickered with damage reports. Indus stood hunched over a console, his scales dulled with fatigue. He looked up as Walter entered. "Sir, the Ringworld's structural integrity is holding, but barely. That dimensional shockwave did a number on our systems." A medical officer stepped forward, data pad in hand. "Preliminary scans show stable life signs. The pod's readout identifies her as Dr. Alara Mason, civilian scientist." "Keep that stasis field engaged," Walter ordered. "We need a secure isolation chamber prepped before we even think about waking her." He turned to address the weary faces of his command staff. "I know you're all exhausted, but what we just witnessed changes everything. Those precursor constructs are activating en masse, and we need answers fast. Indus manipulated a hollow projection, filling the room with a swirling representation of subspace. The energy pulse that triggered the mass activation originated here, he said, highlighting a pulsing node deep within the maelstrom. It suggests some form of overseer intelligence seeding a resonance code. If it keeps escalating, Walter muttered, the dimensional fallout could tear the galaxy apart. Mark Ryder, his face still streaked with grime from the previous battle, spoke up. Sir, if we can track that energy signature to its source, we might have a shot at shutting down whatever's controlling this. Our long-range sensors are shot, a technician interjected. We're practically flying blind out there. Walter's eyes narrowed as an idea formed. The Explorer ship, he said. Its sensor dome looked relatively intact. If we can get it operational... But, sir, Indus cautioned, the ship's systems have been dormant for millennia. We'd need our newly awakened guest, Walter finished. Prep the med bay for revival. Full decontamination protocols. I want security teams on standby. Hours later, Walter stood in the sterile confines of the medical bay, watching as the stasis field around Dr. Mason's pod slowly dissipated. Her eyelids fluttered, then snapped open. She bolted upright, gasping. Alara's eyes darted around the room, taking in the unfamiliar technology. When am I? Walter took a deep breath. Dr. Mason, your expedition launched over 800,000 years ago. Humanity. We've changed a lot since then. He watched as the weight of his words sank in. Alara's face crumpled, a strangled sob escaping her lips. Walter gave her a moment before continuing. I know this is overwhelming, but we desperately need your help. An ancient enemy has resurfaced, threatening not just humanity, but all life in the galaxy. Alara wiped her eyes, visibly steeling herself. What can I do? Walter explained the situation, outlining their plan to use the Explorer's sensors. Despite her grief, Alara's scientific curiosity seemed to spark. I can try, she said. The Explorer's systems were designed to be intuitive. If they're still functional, I should be able to interface with them. Under heavy guard, they escorted Alara to the docking bay where the ancient ship's battered hull loomed. She ran her hand along the familiar contours, a bittersweet smile on her face. Inside the ship, Alara's fingers flew across long dormant consoles. Displays flickered to life, code scrolling across screens. I've got it, she exclaimed. The sensor dome is responding. We should be able to... Her words were cut off as alarms blared throughout the station. Indus's voice crackled over the comm. Commander, we're detecting another precursor forge ship emerging in the Proxima system. Walter's blood ran cold. Even if they could track the energy source, they lacked the firepower to take on multiple sites. But then Alara's voice rang out, triumphant. I've got a lock, the energy trail. It's leading into some kind of fractured region of space. Ryder's team confirmed the readings, tracing the signal to its origin point. Walter's eyes widened as he recognized the coordinates. The former domain, he breathed. It's coming from inside the Zarul quarantine zone. Indus's voice was grave. Sir, that region is off limits for a reason. The dimensional instabilities alone could tear us apart. Walter looked at the holographic display, watching as more precursor sites flickered to life across the galaxy. They were out of options. Prep the Explorer for slipstream, he ordered. We're going in. Walter's boots magnetized to the warped surface beneath him as he led his team through the chaotic dimensional rift. The Explorer's hull groaned behind them, its experimental shielding barely holding against the maelstrom of gravitational forces. Alara, status on those sensor readings, Walter barked into his comm, his voice distorted by the quantum fluctuations surrounding them. Dr. Mason's fingers danced across her wrist-mounted holodisplay, her face illuminated by its eerie glow. The energy signature is intensifying, but these readings, they don't make sense. It's as if space itself is folding in on itself. Dox Keramin, the Kintarian operative, moved with fluid grace despite the dimensional instability. His multifaceted eyes scanned the horizon, tracking invisible currents of zero-point energy. "We're nearing a nexus point. The Overseer's influence is growing stronger." Ryder's voice crackled over the comm. "Sir, I'm detecting anomalous particle emissions dead ahead. Whatever's generating that signal, it's big." Walter raised his fist, signaling the team to halt. Before them, reality itself seemed to fracture and splinter. Shards of what looked like crystallized space-time jutted out at impossible angles, refracting light that shouldn't exist in this abyssal realm. "Indus, deploy the gravimetric anchor," Walter ordered. "We need a stable reference point before we proceed." The Archaean scientist activated a device on his belt, projecting a localized field of artificial gravity. The team felt their footing solidify, providing a much-needed sense of normalcy in this sea of chaos. As they pressed forward, the environment grew increasingly hostile. Tendrils of raw energy lashed out, seeking to disrupt their protective fields. Walter watched as one of his Marines stumbled, his suit's integrity compromised for a split second. The man's arm seemed to phase in and out of existence before the auto-repair systems kicked in. "Stay focused," Walter shouted. "We can't afford any mistakes here." They crested what appeared to be the event horizon of a localized singularity, frozen in a state of perpetual collapse. On the other side, a massive structure loomed, a geometrically impossible lattice of dark energy and exotic matter. Alara gasped, her scientific curiosity momentarily overriding her fear. It's converting the very fabric of space-time into computational substrate. The Overseer isn't just hiding here, it's become one with the former domain itself." As if in response to her words, the structure pulsed with malevolent intelligence. Arcs of energy coalesced into vaguely humanoid shapes, their forms constantly shifting and reforming. "Sentinels!" Dox warned, raising his gravimetric lance. "They've locked onto our biosignatures." The team moved with practiced precision, their backs to each other as the Sentinels closed in. Walter fired, his shot tearing a hole through reality itself before impacting one of the energy constructs. It dissipated in a shower of quantum particles, only to reform seconds later. As the battle intensified, Walter saw flashes of movement in his peripheral vision, ghostly echoes of past and future events bleeding through the tattered veil of space-time. He pushed the disorientation aside, focusing on the task at hand. "Alara, can you use the Explorer's sensor data to pinpoint a weakness?" Walter asked, ducking under a lash of dark energy that threatened to tear his suit apart. Walter's eyes narrowed as he spotted the anomaly Alara had identified, a swirling vortex of pure information at the heart of the precursor structure. "That's our target. Dox, clear us a path. Indus, ready the quantum disruptor. We've got one shot at this." The team surged forward, their suits' thrusters flaring as they pushed through the chaotic dimensional currents. Walter felt reality itself resist their advance, the very laws of physics bending to the will of the awakening Overseer. As they neared the Nexus, the Sentinels redoubled their assault. Walter saw one of his Marines engulfed in a cloud of rapidly shifting probabilities, his form blurring as countless potential futures collided. Walter raised his hand, ready to give the order that would either save humanity or condemn them all to oblivion. The future of the cosmos hung in the balance as they stood on the precipice of cosmic annihilation. Walter's fingers dug into the warped deck plating as reality twisted around them. The Explorer's hull groaned, stressed beyond its design tolerances by the chaotic dimensional forces of the former domain. Hyperspatial disruptions rippled through the ship, causing consoles to flicker and structural supports to bend at impossible angles. "Ryder, status on that signal source," Walter barked, steadying himself against a bulkhead. Mark Ryder's eyes darted across his sensor readouts. "Sir, I've got a lock. The coherent hub is dead ahead through some kind of gravimetric slipstream tunnel." Before Walter could respond, space itself seemed to tear open. Fractal-shaped drones poured through the fissures, their armor shifting and reconfiguring with each passing second. Beams of quantum-phased energy lanced out, scorching the deck where Walter had stood moments before. "Incoming," Dox Keramin shouted, his multifaceted eyes tracking the swarm of hostiles. "Gravimetric shields now." The team dove for cover, as shimmering barriers of warped space-time materialized around them. Force lances slammed into the shields, creating ripples of distorted gravity. Keramin's Kintarian strike force responded with precision. Anti-matter rounds punched through the chaotic space, their contrails leaving ghostly after-images in the fractured continuum. Drones shattered into crystalline shards, only to reform seconds later from the swirling dimensional eddies. The Arkan scientist nodded, retrieving a cluster of devices from his pack. Deploying warp mines, brace for detonation. Indus hurled the high-yield explosives into the fray. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then reality itself seemed to convulse. The mines tore open localized rifts in space-time, shredding through the Overseer's defenses and carving a jagged corridor ahead. "Now!" Walter commanded. His Marines activated smoke dispersal units, flooding the area with a thick haze that bent light in unnatural ways. The team sprinted forward, their armor's grav boots struggling to maintain traction on the shifting surfaces. They emerged into a vast, hyperdimensional caldera that defied comprehension. Writhing tendrils of solidified energy stretched in every direction, pulsing with malevolent intelligence. Alara's voice crackled over the comm. "I'm picking up intense quantum fluctuations. This is like nothing I've ever seen. It's as if we're inside the Overseer's neural pathways." Ryder's probes fanned out, scanning the twisted landscape. "I've got it. The epicenter is there inside that spire." Walter's gaze locked onto a towering structure that seemed to flicker in and out of existence. Its surface bristled with countless quantum uplinks, each one a potential access point to the precursor's vast network. "Alara, we need a way up there," Walter said, eyeing the impossibly steep and shifting surfaces. The scientist's fingers flew across her hollow interface. "I'm reconfiguring our thruster packs now. Channeling zero-point resonance fields should let us traverse those quasi-spatial planes." As the last adjustments were made, a piercing shriek filled the air. The Overseer had adapted. New swarms of weapon drones materialized, their forms overflowing with deadly annihilation lances. Walter's squad engaged the drones, their weapons barely keeping pace with the onslaught. Meanwhile, Keramin's Kintarians worked to create a breach corridor, carving a path through the chaos. "Ryder, now's our chance," Walter shouted. "Deploy the Kugelblitz." Mark Ryder activated the unstable generator, and for an instant, a pinprick of absolute darkness formed in the air. The artificial micro-singularity expanded, its event horizon tearing through the Nexus Spire's outer defenses. Indus seized the opportunity, hurling a satchel charge into the breach. "Entropic dispersal in 3, 2, 1. The detonation sent shockwaves of hypersymmetric entropy cascading through the facility's core. For a fleeting moment, the Overseer's processes faltered. The lancing geometries around them solidified, frozen in mid-transformation. "I'm in!" Ryder exclaimed, his eyes unfocused as he executed a data crypt uplink, retrieving archival records now. But their victory was short-lived. The chamber filled with an otherworldly howl as the Overseer's sentience began to reform. Morphogenic resonators flooded the area, reality itself bending to the ancient intelligence's will. Walter watched in horror as sections of the caldera transmuted into cyclonic metageometries. The laws of physics seemed to unravel around them, leaving the team adrift in a maelstrom of quasi-spatial chaos. "We're out of time," Alara screamed, her body beginning to phase in and out of normal space-time. With seconds left before total annihilation, Mark Ryder made a high-stakes endeavor. "Emergency protocols now. Overload your quantum reactors." Walter nodded, keying in the command sequence. Energy built within their armor, reaching critical mass. The resulting subspace implosion tore a hole through the fabric of reality itself. The team hurtled through a random higher-dimensional slipgate, tumbling through non-Euclidean space, before crashing back onto the deck of the Explorer. They lay there, battered and disoriented, as the implications of their harrowing mission began to sink in. Ryder struggled to his feet, his face ashen. "Sir, you need to see this. The data I retrieved, it's worse than we thought." Walter's heart sank as he absorbed the terrifying truth. The overseer they had faced was merely a fragment, a broken shard of a far greater threat. And if they couldn't find a way to stop it, the very foundations of reality would crumble, consumed by the final spiteful act of a long-dead civilization. Walter Green stood at the viewport of New Chaldea's command center, his eyes fixed on the swirling nebula beyond. The station's reinforced hull creaked under the strain of heightened defensive fields, a constant reminder of the looming threat. "Sir, we've completed the initial data analysis." Alara's voice cut through his thoughts. She approached, her steps quick and purposeful. "The results are troubling." Alara activated a holographic display, filling the air with intricate patterns of light. "These are the energy signatures we extracted from the Overseer's nexus. Each point represents a potential awakening site." The hologram pulsed, points of light multiplying exponentially across the galactic map. Walter's fists tight as he watched entire sectors vanish under the spreading illumination. "How long?" he asked, his voice low. "Total galactic extinction," Walter finished. The command center doors hissed open as Indus entered, his arcane features set in a grim expression. "The Council's response has arrived. They're maintaining their position." Walter's fist clenched. "Damn it, we don't have time for their bureaucratic nonsense." He strode to the central console, keying in his command codes. "Patch me through to Admiral Chen, now." "With all due respect, sir, rash action is exactly what we need. Every second we waste, more of those things are waking up." Chen's expression hardened. "I understand your frustration, but we can't risk open conflict without—" "Without what?" Walter interrupted. "More data, more time? We don't have either." He gestured to the galactic map, now a sea of pulsing light. "This is what we're facing, Admiral. In 3 days there won't be a galaxy left to save." Chen's eyes widened as he absorbed the information. For a long moment silence filled the command center. Walter leaned forward, his voice steady. "A surgical strike. We have the coordinates for the latest Overseer emergence. If we can disrupt its activation, we might buy ourselves more time. And if you fail, then at least we'll go down fighting," Walter replied. Chen nodded slowly. "Very well, you have provisional authorization for a covert operation. But Walter, be careful. We're treading in unknown waters here." As the transmission ended, Walter turned to his team. "Alara, I need those emergence coordinates. Indus, prep our fastest ship with every piece of anti-precursor tech we've got. Docs, assemble a strike team." The command center erupted into a flurry of activity. Walter felt a surge of energy coursing through him. They were taking action, finally pushing back against the cosmic tide, threatening to engulf them all. Hours later, Walter stood in the launch bay of a modified stealth corvette. His hand rested on the hull, feeling the thrum of its advanced engines. "Last check complete, sir," Ryder reported, approaching with a datapad. "We're as ready as we'll ever be." Walter nodded, turning to address the assembled strike team. Marines, scientists, and specialists from a dozen worlds stood ready, united in their perseverance to face the unimaginable. "I won't lie to you," Walter began. "What we're about to attempt has never been done before. We're going up against forces that shape the very fabric of our universe. But remember this, we're not just fighting for ourselves. We're fighting for every sentient being, every world, every future that might exist." He paused, meeting each pair of eyes in turn. "Whatever happens out there, know that your actions today will echo across the cosmos. Now let's go make some noise." As the team boarded the corvette, Walter cast one last glance at the starbase behind them. The fate of everything they knew hung in the balance. With a deep breath, he stepped inside, the hatch sealing behind him with a final resounding clang. Walter smacked his palm on the console, the holographic display flickering at the impact. "We can't sit idly by while these things awaken. Every second counts." Admiral Chen's face filled the screen. his expression grave. "I understand your urgency, Walter, but the Council—" Walter's eyes gleamed with fierce intensity. "A preemptive strike. We hit them before they can fully awaken." He turned to Indus, who stood nearby, analyzing data streams. "Indus, show the Admiral what we've got." The Archaean scientist stepped forward, his long fingers dancing across the hollow interface. A three-dimensional star map materialized, pulsing with ominous red markers. "We've identified a system showing intense quantum signatures," Indus explained, his voice calm but urgent. "An overseer uplink is manifesting here." Walter nodded. "If we can disrupt it before full cohesion, we might derail the cascading awakening." Chan leaned closer to his screen, studying the data. "And how do you plan to reach it in time?" Indus brought up schematics of a sleek, angular ship. "We're retrofitting a strike force with experimental warp drive enhancers, Zarul Tech, reverse-engineered from what we captured during the war." Walter continued, "These enhancers will let us perform interdimensional shunts. We can bypass normal space, pinpoint our emergence within the subspace fractures surrounding the Overseer's source." Chen's eyebrows shot up. "That's incredibly risky." "So is doing nothing," Walter countered. After a long pause, Chen nodded. "Very well, you have provisional authorization. But Walter, be careful, we can't afford to lose you or your team." As the transmission ended, Walter turned to his assembled crew. "You heard the man. We've got work to do." The next 48 hours passed in a blur of frantic activity. New Chaldea's shipyards hummed with round-the-clock operations as 3 heavily armored cruisers underwent extensive modifications. Walter paced the deck of the lead ship, watching as technicians swarmed over the experimental warp drive enhancers. The air crackled with an almost palpable tension. Dox Keramin approached, his multifaceted eyes gleaming. "My Quintarians are ready, sir. 0-point specialists, just as you requested." Walter nodded. "Good, we'll need every edge we can get." As the final preparations were made, Walter gathered his elite vanguard team on the bridge. Faces etched with tenacity stared back at him. Indus, Ryder, and the cream of Guardian Command's human and Quintarian forces. "I won't sugarcoat this," Walter began. "What we're about to attempt has never been done before. The risks are enormous, but the stakes are everything." He took a deep breath. "If we fail, if the Overseers fully awaken, there won't be a galaxy left to save, so let's make this count." With a final nod to his crew, Walter gave the order. "Launch!" The 3 cruisers surged forward, their newly installed warp enhancers pulsing with barely contained energy. As they cleared New Chaldea's defensive perimeter, reality itself seemed to bend around them. Walter felt a moment of gut-wrenching disorientation as the interdimensional shunt engaged. Space twisted, folded, and then shattered like glass. They emerged into chaos. Fractured subspace swirled around them, a maelstrom of conflicting dimensional forces, and through it all, a swarm of angular shapes converged on their position. "Precursor drones," Ryder shouted. "The Overseer's defenses are active." The Vanguard cruisers unleashed a barrage of energy weapons, carving burning trails through the void. Precursor drones exploded in bursts of otherworldly light, only to be replaced by more pouring through dimensional rifts. Walter's mind raced, plotting vectors through the madness. "We need to push through, Ryder. Calculate an intrusion trajectory. Indus, keep those enhancers stable." Suddenly Ryder's voice crackled over the calm tinged with panic. "We're hit. Warp drive's going critical." Walter watched in horror as Ryder's cruiser spun out of control, hurtling towards a wildly fluctuating slipgate. In an instant it vanished, swallowed by the chaotic subspace. "Ryder!" Walter shouted, but there was no response. Pushing down his fear, he focused on the task at hand. "Indus, we have to press on. Can you get us closer to the resonance source?" The Archaean's fingers flew across his console. "Calculating now. Prepare for micro-jump." Walter felt a surge of acceleration as their 2 remaining cruisers performed a near-impossible maneuver. Space twisted again, and suddenly they were in the heart of the system. What greeted them defied description. Massive pillars of energy erupted from a planetoid below, coalescing into a skeletal structure that pulsed with malevolent intelligence. The Overseer's computational nexus was taking form before their eyes. "We're not too late," Walter breathed. Then, snapping back to action, "All batteries, open fire, target those uplink conduits." The cruisers unleashed hell, anti-matter lances stabbing down at the nascent nexus. On the planetoid surface, Walter saw flashes of weapons fire as Keramin's Kintarian troops engaged in fierce combat with the Overseer's autonomous defenders. As the battle raged, a familiar ship suddenly materialized within the nexus itself. Ryder's cruiser, battered and sparking, had somehow survived its wild dimensional journey. Walter's heart leapt. "Ryder, can you hear me?" The response came through static. "Warp drive's gone, sir. We're going to overload the reactors. It's the only way to—" A shockwave of unimaginable force washed over them. Walter felt reality itself buckle and strain. Then, as suddenly as it began, it was over. Where the Overseer's resonance source had been, there was now only an expanding cloud of quantum debris. The immediate threat had been neutralized, but at a terrible cost. As the remaining ships limped back towards New Chaldea, Walter stared out at the stars. They had won a reprieve, but he knew the war was just getting started. Somewhere out there, more Overseers were stirring, and humanity would need to be ready. The battered remnants of Walter's strike force limped back to New Chaldea, the vast outpost looming against the starfield. As they docked, Walter stood at the viewport, his face etched with exhaustion and grief. "We did it, Indus," he said quietly, "but at what cost?" The Archean scientist nodded solemnly. "Every victory against the Overseers exacts a terrible price." They disembarked to a flurry of activity. Federation relief ships swarmed the docking bays, unloading crates of medical supplies and rushing injured personnel to the med bays. The air filled with the hum of anti-grav gurneys and the sharp orders of triage teams. Walter strode through the chaos, his eyes scanning the faces of the wounded. He paused to clasp the hand of a young Marine, her uniform still scorched from planet-side combat. "You fought well, soldier," he said. "Rest now. We'll need you for the battles ahead." The next hours blurred into a haze of debriefings and status reports. Walter found himself standing before Ryder's memorial, a simple hologram flickering above an urn of ashes. The fallen engineer's face rotated slowly, eternally young. "We gather to honor the courage of Mark Ryder," Walter began, his voice carrying across the hushed assembly. His sacrifice saved countless lives and struck a blow against the Overseer threat. As Walter spoke, he noticed Keramin and his Kintarian warriors at the back of the crowd. Their multifaceted eyes gleamed as they performed intricate gestures, a silent tribute to their fallen comrade. The ceremony concluded, and Walter committed Ryder's ashes to the void. He watched the glittering motes disperse among the stars, each a testament to one man's bravery. Later, in the command center, Indus approached with a data pad. His long fingers tapped a rapid sequence, bringing up a galactic map. "Walter, I've received disturbing news from my network," he said. "Look at these resonance spikes." Walter leaned in, his eyes widening as he took in the data. Across uncharted sectors, pulsing red markers indicated new Overseer activity. "They're waking up," Walter breathed, "and we've barely recovered from taking down one." He straightened, a fire kindling in his eyes. "Call everyone in now." The emergency strategy meeting convened within the hour. Walter stood at the head of the table, surrounded by Guardian Command's top brass and Federation representatives. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "we face an unprecedented crisis. The Overseer threat is escalating faster than we anticipated." He brought up the galactic map, highlighting the new resonance spikes. "I propose we launch preemptive strikes against these emerging sites. We use the same interdimensional insertion tactics that worked before. Hit them hard, hit them fast, before they can fully activate." A murmur of unease rippled through the room. Admiral Chen, his face lined with concern, spoke up. "Walter, I understand your urgency, but we're still reeling from the last engagement. Our resources are stretched thin." "We lost good people out there," another officer added. To take on multiple sites simultaneously that could leave us completely exposed. Walter slammed his palm on the table. And what happens if we do nothing? If these overseers achieve full resonance lock, they'll unleash constructs that will render our defenses useless. The debate raged on, voices rising as factions formed. Some argued for mass evacuations, others for consolidating their forces in core systems. "You're talking about abandoning entire worlds," Walter shouted, his frustration boiling over. Billions of lives just written off. As the argument reached a fever pitch, Indus burst into the room. His normally calm demeanor was shaken. "Walter, I've just received a priority communication," he said urgently. "It's the Zaral. They've discovered the Overseer data." A hush fell over the assembly. Walter's blood ran cold. "What are they planning?" Indus's voice was grim. "They aim to seize control of the resonance codes. If they succeed, they'll have an army of genocidal constructs at their disposal." Walter's mind raced. In that moment he knew conventional protocols wouldn't be enough. He stood tall, his voice ringing with authority. "Enough debate. We're out of time," he declared. "I'm authorizing immediate action. New Chaldea's shipyards will begin retrofitting our remaining vessels with interdimensional shunt capabilities. Indus, deploy your covert teams. We need to sabotage those Zaral uplink stations before they can access the full resonance data." Protests erupted from the Federation representatives. "You can't just unilaterally—" Walter cut them off. "I can and I am. The fate of the stars hangs in the balance. We move now or we perish." As the outraged voices rose, Dox Keramin stepped forward. The Kintarian's multifaceted eyes glinted with fierce drive. "Guardian Command has my support," he declared. "My warriors stand ready." Walter nodded gratefully. "Prepare your Marines, Dox. We're taking the fight to them." As the meeting dissolved into chaos, Walter strode from the room. The die was cast. With the Federation Council paralyzed by indecision, a new front had opened in the war for survival. The race to control the cosmic death code had begun, and Walter knew the fate of all life now balanced on a knife's edge. Walter stood on the bridge of the lead cruiser, his heart made as he gave the order. "Initiate interdimensional shunt. Target, Goldia Nebula." The experimental Zaral warp drives hummed to life, their energy crackling through the hull. Space itself seemed to bend and twist around them. Walter's stomach lurched as reality fractured, then reassembled. They emerged into chaos. The dimensional shear zone near their target coordinates erupted with weapons fire. Automated hunter-killers swarmed toward them, their angular forms overflowing with alien weaponry. "Shields up," Walter barked. "Indus, coordinate our defenses." The Archaean's fingers flew across his console, projecting shimmering energy barriers around the three cruisers. Enemy fire splashed against them in bursts of prismatic light. Walter leaned forward, eyes locked on the tactical display. "Helm, bring us about. Weapons, prepare gravimetric lances. We're punching through." The cruiser's main guns roared to life, unleashing searing beams of focused gravitational energy. Hunter-killers caught in the barrage crumpled and shattered, their exotic materials unable to withstand the onslaught. "Entry vector established," the weapons officer reported, "but it's closing fast." Walter nodded grimly. "Keramin, your Marines are clear for drop. Hit that planetoid hard." On the hangar deck below, Kintarian troops piled into assault shuttles. Keramin's multifaceted eyes gleamed as he addressed his warriors. "For New Chaldea and all free beings, we strike now." The shuttles rocketed out of the launch bay, weaving through the firestorm of combat. Walter watched them descend toward the barren world below, where writhing tendrils of energy marked the nascent Overseer uplink. "Understood," Walter replied. "All ships concentrate fire on those hunter-killer swarms. Clear a path for our ground team." The cruisers unleashed their full arsenal. Gravimetric lances carved burning furrows through space, while swarms of micro-missiles homed in on individual targets. Explosions bloomed in the void, as hunter-killers disintegrated under the assault. On the planetoid's surface, Keramin led his Marines in a mad dash across fractured terrain. The uplink nexus loomed before them, a cancerous growth of impossible geometry, pulsing with malevolent power. "Plant those charges," Keramin shouted. "We have to take it down before full cohesion." His troops fanned out, setting demolition devices along twisting conduits of alien energy, but their presence didn't go unnoticed. The air shimmered, and suddenly they were surrounded. Fractal hunter-killers materialized around them, their forms defying conventional physics. Tendrils of warping force lashed out, distorting space itself as they struck. A Kintarian marine screamed as one such tendril caught him, his body twisting grotesquely before vanishing into nothing. Keramin snarled, his plasma rifle spitting streams of superheated matter at the monstrosities. The Kintarians fought with savage intensity, their genetically enhanced reflexes allowing them to dance between the reality-warping attacks. One by one, charges were set and armed along the Nexus's vital points. In orbit, Walter's cruisers continued their relentless bombardment. "Status on those demolition charges?" he demanded. Indus consulted his readouts. "Detonation imminent. Recommend immediate saturation strike to maximize damage." Walter nodded. "All ships prepare antimatter payloads on my mark." The charges below detonated in a cascade of quantum disruption. The uplink nexus shuddered, its cohesion fracturing. The cruisers unleashed their most devastating weapons. Streams of antimatter lanced downward, impacting the compromised nexus in a cataclysm of annihilation. Reality itself seemed to scream as the alien construct shattered into a maelstrom of disrupted fragments. Space twisted once more as the battered task force engaged their drives, barely outpacing the collapsing dimensional pocket behind them. They emerged into normal space, the Goldia Nebula now unmarred by the Overseer's taint. But victory had come at a cost. Keramin's voice crackled over the comm, heavy with grief. "Ground team returning to ship. We've taken heavy losses, sir." Walter closed his eyes for a moment, honoring the fallen. Then his voice hardened with grit. "Understood, Keramin. But we can't stop now. Set course for the Eskara drift. There's another hotspot forming, and we're the only ones who can stop it." The cruisers blazed across the stars, racing against time as another alien horror took shape in the depths of uncharted space. The cruiser shuddered as it dropped out of slipstream, its hull groaning under the strain of recent battle. Walter gripped the command chair, his nucleus tightening as he surveyed the damage readouts scrolling across the main view screen. "Status report," he barked, his voice hoarse from hours of shouting orders. Indus's fingers danced across his console, pulling up system diagnostics. "Critical damage to engines and weapons systems, life support holding at 63% capacity, hull integrity compromised in sectors 7 through 12. Walter nodded grimly. "And the crew?" "We've lost over 80% of our personnel," Keramin interjected, his multifaceted eyes reflecting the dim emergency lighting. "The survivors are mostly wounded. Medical bay is overwhelmed." The bridge fell silent as the weight of their losses sank in. Walter stood, pacing the length of the command deck. Outside the viewports, the familiar silhouette of New Chaldea Station loomed against the star-studded void. "Sir," a young ensign called out, her voice trembling, "we're receiving an emergency hail from the station." "On screen," Walter ordered. The battered face of Admiral Chen appeared, his eyes widening as he took in the state of Walter's bridge crew. "Green, what in blazes happened out there? We lost contact hours ago." Walter leaned forward, his expression hard. "We engaged an Overseer construct, Admiral. It was unlike anything we've encountered before. The entire system was being consumed, transmuted into something alien." He paused, swallowing hard. "We managed to destroy it, but at great cost. And there's more. The Zarul were there. They're after the Overseer technology." The Admiral's fists tight. "Get your ship docked immediately. We need to debrief and—" His words were cut off as alarms blared across the bridge. Indus spun in his chair, his eyes wide. "Multiple resonance spikes detected. It's happening across the entire sector." Walter rushed to the sensor display, his heart pounding. The The screen was awash with pulsing red markers, each one representing a potential overseer incursion. "They're everywhere," he breathed. The ship rocked violently as they approached the station. Karamin steadied himself against a bulkhead. "We're losing structural integrity. We need to evacuate." Walter turned to face his battered crew, his eyes blazing with fierce intensity. "Listen to me. What we've seen, what we've learned, it could be the key to stopping this. We can't let it die with us." He jabbed a finger at the comms officer. "Upload all combat data and sensor logs to the station's mainframe. Karamin, get our wounded to the escape pods. We're abandoning ship." As the crew scrambled to comply, Walter activated the ship-wide intercom. "This is Commander Green. All hands, abandon ship. This is not a drill. I repeat, abandon ship." The deck plates shuddered beneath their feet as the cruiser limped into docking range. Walter turned to Indus, clasping the Archan's shoulder. "I need you to stay with me. We have to make sure that data gets through." Indus nodded solemnly. "Until the end, my friend." They worked feverishly, fingers flying across consoles as they transferred terabytes of crucial information. Around them, the ship groaned and creaked, systems failing one by one. "Data transfer complete," Indus announced as the last escape pod jettisoned. Walter allowed himself a small smile. "Then let's get the hell out of here." They sprinted through corridors filled with billowing smoke, dodging falling debris. The docking collar loomed ahead, their salvation mere meters away. As they crossed the threshold onto New Chaldea Station, a deafening explosion rocked the deck. Walter turned to see his ship, the last vestige of Guardian Command's fleet, tear itself apart in a brilliant flash of light. He stood there, chest heaving, as station personnel swarmed around them. In the distance, alert klaxons began to wail. The war for humanity's survival had entered a new, desperate phase, and Walter knew that the horrors they had witnessed were only the beginning. The acrid smell of burning circuits filled the air as Walter surveyed the devastation around him. New Chaldea Outpost, once a bastion of hope, now lay in ruins. Sparks flew from shattered consoles, and the few remaining crew members moved with grim purpose through the smoke-filled corridors. Walter's voice cut through the chaos. "Status report!" A haggard technician looked up from a flickering display. "Sir, long-range sensors are picking up massive resonance spikes across multiple systems. The Overseer constructs. They're growing stronger by the minute." Walter's heart made as he processed the information. He turned to face the remnants of his command staff, their faces etched with exhaustion and fear. "We can't stay here," he declared. "We need to strike at the heart of this threat before it's too late." Captain Elena Reeves, her uniform torn and bloodied, stepped forward. "With all due respect, Commander, we barely have enough ships left to evacuate our wounded. Another interdimensional strike would be suicide." Walter shook his head. "We don't have a choice. If we don't act now, there won't be a galaxy left to defend." He strode to the central holomap, bringing up a tactical display of the surrounding systems. The pulsing red markers of Overseer activity spread like a cancer across the stars. "Here's the plan," Walter announced, his finger hovering over a particularly bright cluster of energy signatures. "We're going to divert all power from the outpost's reactors into one massive antimatter strike. Hit them hard enough to buy us some time." Dox Karamin, the Kintarian warrior, stepped forward. His multifaceted eyes glinted with fierce approval. "A bold strategy, Commander. My warriors stand ready." As the gathered officers debated the merits of the plan, Walter turned to his chief engineer. "Can we do it?" The engineer nodded grimly. "It'll take some creative rewiring, but we can convert the fusion grid into an antimatter catalyst chamber. It'll be unstable as hell, though." "Do it," Walter ordered, "and get those targeting vectors locked in. We only get one shot at this." The next hours passed in a blur of frantic activity. Walter watched as Karamin personally oversaw the arming of thermonuclear charges, the Kintarians' hands steady despite the stakes. Technicians rerouted power conduits, pushing the outpost systems far beyond their design limits. Finally, everything was in place. Walter stood before the jury-rigged firing controls, his hand hovering over the launch sequence. "This is it," he announced over the station-wide comm. "All personnel brace for impact." He took a deep breath and pressed the button. The entire outpost shuddered as a blinding wave of energy erupted from its launch apertures. The stream of catalyzed antimatter tore across dimensional boundaries, leaving a trail of fractured space-time in its wake. For a moment there was silence, then the sensors exploded with data. "Direct hit!" the tactical officer shouted. "Massive subspace fractures detected, the Overseer uplink. It's destabilizing." A ragged cheer went up from the exhausted crew, but Walter knew their reprieve would be short-lived. "Listen up," he called out, silencing the celebration. "We've bought ourselves some time, but we need to move fast. All personnel prepare for immediate evacuation to the mobile shipyard bastion. That's our last fallback point." As the crew scrambled to salvage what they could from the dying outpost, Walter turned to Indus. The Archaean's eyes glowed with an intense light. "I may have a solution," Indus said quietly. "A weapon that could end this war once and for all, but its creation will be dangerous." Walter nodded grimly. "At this point, old friend, dangerous is all we have left." As the battered remnants of Guardian Command prepared for their desperate journey, Walter knew that the true test still lay ahead. They would make their stand at the bastion, and there they would either protect the universe or die trying. The mobile shipyard bastion groaned under the strain of emergency repairs. Sparks flew as technicians welded reinforced hull plates, their faces illuminated by the crackling energy. In the heart of the station, Indus hunched over a workbench cluttered with circuit boards and quantum relays. "Pass me the phase inverter," he said to a nearby assistant, his many-faceted eyes never leaving the delicate components before him. In the command center, Walter paced before a holographic display of the surrounding star systems. Lieutenant Hara Kalen's fingers danced across a control panel, inputting the false data that would lure their enemies to their doom. "Disinformation package uploaded, sir," Kalen reported, her voice steady despite the tension evident in her clenched jaw. Walter nodded, turning to face Dox Karamin. The Kintarian warlord stood with arms crossed, his alien features set in a fierce scowl. Karamin's mandibles clicked. "We stand prepared to meet death with honor, Commander." The words hung heavy in the air. Walter opened his mouth to respond, but alarms blared throughout the station. Kalen's hands flew across her console. "Multiple resonance signatures detected," she shouted. "They're coming in fast." Walter strode to the main viewport. In the distance, space itself seemed to twist and warp as the Overseer constructs approached. Their impossible geometries hurt the eyes, defying the laws of physics. "Initiate defensive protocols," Walter ordered. "Karamin, get your people into position." The Kintarian nodded sharply and left the command center. Walter watched as Zarul shield generators flickered to life across the debris field surrounding the bastion. The air crackled with ozone as spatial flux emitters powered up. Outside, the first wave of hunter-killer geometrics slammed against the outpost's defenses. The multi-layered deflector arrays flared brilliant blue, barely holding against the onslaught. Reality itself seemed to bend and warp around the attacking constructs. In the engineering bay, Indus looked up from his work as the station shuddered. "We're out of time," he muttered. He tapped his communicator. "Walter, the device is ready. Initiating atmospheric insertion sequence now." Walter's voice crackled over the comm. "Understood. All personnel, brace for payload launch." Indus input the final command sequence. The floor beneath his feet vibrated as massive accelerator rails engaged. With a deafening roar, the anti-wave device shot skyward, trailing a blaze of superheated plasma. As the payload breached the stratosphere, an oppressive silence fell over the command center. Walter held his breath, watching the device's telemetry on the main display. Suddenly, space itself seemed to fold inward at a single point amid the debris field. "Singularity detected," Kalen called out. "Overseer convergence imminent." Walter's hands tightened on the edge of the command console. "Indus now!" In that instant, as reality itself teetered on the brink of annihilation, Indus triggered the anti-wave sequence. A blinding flash erupted from the heart of the singularity, followed by a shockwave that rippled through the very fabric of space-time. The command center rocked violently. Sparks showered from overloading consoles as the quantum shielding strained to its limits. Walter stumbled, catching himself against a bulkhead. Through the viewport, he watched in awe as the Overseer constructs twisted and shattered, their impossible forms unraveling before his eyes. When the cosmic tremors finally subsided, an eerie stillness settled over the bastion. Walter straightened, surveying the damage around him. Smoke curled from fried circuitry, and emergency lighting cast everything in a dim red glow. "Status report," he called out, his voice hoarse. Kaelin coughed, waving away acrid smoke from her station. "Sensors are coming back online. I'm not detecting any Overseer signatures, sir. They're gone." Walter closed his eyes for a moment, letting the weight of their impossible victory wash over him. When he opened them again, he saw Indus enter the command center, his alien features unreadable. Together they made their way through the ravaged corridors of the outpost. The acrid stench of burnt circuitry filled the air, mingling with the metallic tang of spilled hydraulic fluid. They passed the bodies of fallen Kintarian warriors and human crew members, their faces frozen in final acts of defiance. As they reached the main airlock, Walter paused, looking out at the debris field that had been their final battleground. The stars beyond seemed colder somehow, as if the very cosmos mourned the losses suffered this day. "What now?" he asked, turning to Indus. The Archon's multifaceted eyes gleamed in the dim light. "Now we rebuild. We honor the fallen by ensuring their sacrifice was not in vain." Walter nodded, squaring his shoulders. He keyed in the access code for the small shuttle that would carry them back to New Chaldea. As the airlock cycled open, he took one last look at the battered outpost that had been their final stand. If you finished this story, please subscribe and like the video. Then leave a comment that says, "I liked the story," and I will heart every single one of them. It really helps me. Thank you for your time.